as an extra?
This is just a backup.
Backup, yeah.
After
Smart.
So after we spent all of this money to get here, we're going to make sure we get a recording. And so the recorder is on, and as mentioned, as I said when the recorder was off, I want to read a brief introduction. Today is October 27, 2011. My name is Philip Scarpino. I'm a professor of history at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, and the director of oral history for the Randall L. Tobias Center for Leadership Excellence. And today I have the privilege of interviewing Dr. Manfred Kets Vries in a conference room in the Park Plaza Westminster Bridge Hotel, London, England. Dr. Kets Vries is a leading scholar of leadership, and we are going to provide a detailed summary of his professional accomplishments that will accompany this interview. But for right now, I'll say that over a long career, he's authored or co-authored several dozen books and an impressive body of articles and book chapters relating to leadership and management. He earned a master's degree in business administration and a doctoral degree in business administration from Harvard University in 1968, 1970, respectively. He completed psychoanalytic training at the Canadian Psychoanalytic Institute in 1982, which included 4 years of supervised clinical work. Among his academic positions, he's founder of INSEAD Global Leadership Center. In 2003, he stepped down as director in May of 2011. He's the holder of the Raoul de Vitry de Avocourt Chair in Leadership Development at INSEAD since 1992. In 2008, the International Leadership Association inducted Dr. Kets Vries into the Leadership Legacy Project, along with Bernard Bass, Joseph Roos, Warren Bennis, James McGregor Burns, and Francis Hesselbein. The International Leadership Association also gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2008. So, Dr. Kets Vries, I'd like to ask your permission to record this interview, to have the interview transcribed, and to deposit the transcript and the recording with the International Leadership Association, the Tobias Center, and the IUPUI Archives and Special Collection, where they may be used by the patrons of those organizations.
It's fine.
All right. A long lead into a short answer. Thank you so much. So ordinarily I would begin an interview by asking some basic demographic questions, and I'm going to get to those in a minute. But I thought maybe I'd start by, with some broader questions. And the way I'd like to do this is to say that I read an article that you published a long time ago in 1994 titled The Leadership Mystique. It appeared in the Academy of Management Executive, Volume 8. And I'm going to read a few lines for the benefit of someone who might listen to this recording in the future, so they'll know what we know. You said, all of us possess some kind of inner theater and are strongly motivated by a specific inner script. Over time, through interactions with caretakers, teachers, and other influential people, this inner theater develops. The internalized core conflictual relationship themes that make up this inner theater form the core of an individual's personality and are the matrix on which behavior and actions are based. Our internal theater, in which the patterns that underlie our character come into play, influences our behavior throughout our lives and plays an essential role in the molding of leaders. Well, you clearly are a leader, particularly in terms of the scholarship of leadership and coaching of leaders. So I'm wondering if you could begin this interview by telling me about your own inner theater. Who are some of the influential people that have contributed to the development of your inner theater?
Hopefully for most people they are their parents, I would think. So my parents certainly influenced me, and my grandfather, who on my mother's side, I guess you have to realize that I'm born during the war, and that was a very difficult period in Holland. It's probably one of my interests in leadership is related to that, because I've written initially in my first part of my career quite a bit on the darker side of leadership. I was the pathologist of organization.
I'm going to ask you about that later on. I noticed that.
But basically, I remember I still have a very vivid memory of my grandfather at a little radio, listening to listening what we said about the Nuremberg trials. And my grandfather we lived in a small village outside Amsterdam. And he had something like 20 people under, it's called onderduikers in the Dutch language, but they were hidden there, and it was a very...
He was hiding Jews.
Hiding them, yeah. A very risky business. He was a good carpenter, so he had built double walls and things like that. And so my mother, it was probably, in a way, paradoxically, the best time of her life, because she felt really, really useful. Because, how to feed all those people, how to get food for them. And also how to protect them one way or another. And if you have to think about it, you probably may have read the book of Anne Frank, to be locked up and locked up and locked up, to it has a serious sense of claustrophobia, so how to calm those people down. I guess I must have been quite the object of attention because I was a young baby, so they probably played with me and things like that. I have no memories of that. I have some dreams, dream fragments. You don't know how clear that is. But that, so my grandfather, he would give his shirt away to anybody. There's a story of two children, one was 17 and one was, I think, 14, had walked all the way from Poland. That's a long hike.
Yes.
That's a long hike, and the girl asked if my grandfather had heard about him, if he could take the boy, and so he did. And he's still alive, the boy, and he went to Israel. It's a little bit of a tragic life, but that's the way the person he was. Of course, later on, you get other people who influence me. You're always influenced by my brother, which is younger than me, so we were very close because my parents ironically divorced after the war.
Mm-hmm.
My father is Jewish, so my mother in a way saved him in many ways because of the initial period when you had mixed marriages, they would not be put into camps. He was put into camps, he got him out one way or another. She spoke fluent German.
So your father was basically put into a holding camp and then got
yes,
out?
and my mother got him out. Got him out. My father took quite some risk, but certainly a part of the family ended up in not a nice place and died. So those memories are very important. So that I think it relates to my interest in leadership. And then I have an incident. I guess my mother shipped her two sons off to a camp every summer, which was, I guess, also some freedom, because I don't think they were very easy children. He fought a lot. And I have a memory, I wrote about it once in one of my, as an introduction, also in my book. Normally people would stay for, I think, 10 days or so. We stayed double so long, so I could really, out of sight, so some freedom.
To give your mother time out.
Exactly. And so the new group was coming. We were not very tall. Dutchmen are usually big. We were rather, it's kind of small comparison. And there was some kind of bathtub sitting on the land for the cows, like for the cattle, filled with cold water. So we said it's old habit here in this particular camp that everybody has to go under in this bathtub. And there was this whole line of children. Talk about group psychology. And the two little ones, the two of us, everybody went in there. And talk about how simple it is when you take some a little bit like the Milgram experiment. It's just my Milgram experiment until finally the camp leader saw what we were doing and said, "What the hell are you doing?" And so we got into the tub. We were thrown in the tub eventually by him. But it was kind of interesting how people can behave like cattle. And anyhow, to talk
so
about.
This was a large outdoor bathtub
Yeah,
full of cold water.
Yes, cold water. If you get the image.
Yeah.
Sitting somewhere in the middle of a meadow.
Yes.
And so all this sort of line of 30 children lined up, taking some of their clothes off and bang in the bathtub. So that was probably then I studied, actually, I also have a degree in economics, so I always make the joke, I combine the dismal science with the impossible profession. Dismal science, Keynes, although it's Carlyle apparently, I just read recently, and impossible profession is Freud. But I studied economics before that. Anyhow, I went, after I finished my economic studies in Holland, I took a freighter. It's so romantic notions of a freighter, romantic things. So I took the freighter.
The Norwegian freighters.
It was a Norwegian freighter.
Yes.
You're right. It was a Norwegian freighter. I still remember that goat cheese. There's some kind of goat cheese they had, but it was so boring. And the first I want to get out was not this. I was romantic notions of.
So it wasn't romantic.
Not at all.
Yes.
Boring.
Yes.
Boring. So the first stop was Boston. I got out. And I had been at Harvard Summer School when I was 17, and it was quite, from coming from a small village, was quite an eye-opener to me, all those different people. So I walked over to the Harvard Business School and talked myself into a program. It's called the International Teachers Program, ITP. It still exists, not at Harvard.
I saw that on your resume.
Yeah,
I wondered how that got there.
It was Harvard's attempt to, their focus on the case method, and so to make some propaganda for the case method all over the world. But it was a free studies program. So, and then at that time, one of the advisors was an advisor. Listen, this is this funny course by a man called Abraham Selesnik. It's called Psychoanalytic Psychology and Management Theory. And as an economist, that's kind of interesting. So I still remember it very clearly because the first assignment was more historical, was Jones' biography of Freud. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's very big, and my English was not very good. So I spent the whole week reading that book. It was actually 2 volumes in the norm, but it was a compact one. Nobody had read it, of course, and in the seminar only me. I was too naive. But I also had to read the Red Man, the Wolf Man, and the Psychotic Dr. Schreber, which is very different from reading economics. So I got fascinated. There was a man called Abraham Selesnik, who was a professor at the Harvard Business School, and as a non-medical doctor was going through psychoanalytic training, which was fairly unusual at the time. So I got fascinated by that and said that's an interesting role model to combine those two. It's kind of ironic. I saw him a few days ago. I was in Boston, and he's in bed. He's obviously his mind is no longer there. But he was very important at the time as some kind of mentor. I became his assistant, and I did an MBA and an EBA. And then I worked for a short while for him. So those are important. And then of course, reflecting, I had 2 psychoanalysts. When you are a psychoanalyst, you have to go through psychoanalysis. First, I had a woman in Paris. She's very famous. She just died. It was just died in the Guardian. She was a Kiwi, but she Joyce McDougall, who has written. She had a very nuanced way of, as opposed to most psychoanalysts, she was very elegant dressed lady. And she made the best presentations. Most presentations by psychoanalysts are thoroughly boring. She wasn't. When she would make a presentation, it was a packed house. It was exciting. And I had her as my analyst.
And you said it was Joyce McDougall?
Joyce McDougall, yeah. And she was just recently in the Guardian. There was an article about her. And she wrote about the inner theater also. It was the influence of the inner theater. And she also talked about neo-sexualities, trying to be not perversions, but basically, I always say, the interesting people in life would be a little bit crazy, the normal paths, psychopaths, and sociopaths, whatever. But normal paths can also be a problem when you're too normal. So she influenced me, but and actually I went in analysis with her when I was my first appointment at INSEAD. Then after 2 years I got fired. I had a lot of big mouth, I think, but the wrong reasons.
I'm going to ask you about that later on.
I got fired, but they wanted me to come back the next year. So I basically said, no, screw it. So so I went. I was at Harvard at the time. Then I went to Henry Mintzberg. Really hired me, which was kind of funny because there were 2 candidates. One candidate was giving a presentation on monkey behavior. Henry was, the nature of managerial work, what the hell monkeys do. So I got a job. But there I had another analyst.
And that was at McGill University?
McGill, yeah. I had another analyst, he was the head of psychiatry and the head of the ILA Memorial Institute, which is the big mental health think tank in Canada. And he also has been influential. Also, both of them are not, that's my rebellious attitude, not traditional psychoanalysts, because I cannot stand those. That's I say always do anything that works, and psychoanalysts have been their own worst enemies in many ways, in the way they have been, bold men fighting for a comb, I always say, they're so inward looking, and saying how many hours the person has to be, instead of saying listen, the whole world out there of business, for example, and do something about it. In that respect, Selesnik was a pioneer, and there was another person at the time at the Harvard Business School and the School of Public Health, Harry Levinson, was there, and then you had people here in London, the Tavistock Institute. So those are, and of course I learned, and of course I had a crazy supervisor, Clifford Scott, and I mean, he was quite a man. He was probably the founder, he was the editor of the International Psychoanalytic Journal. Mendes Beard, that's probably the association I have. So. And he
must have been a distinguished man then.
He was a Kleinian, as you know what that is. A Kleinian usually has these groups in psychoanalysis, and he was very difficult. I remember when I was in training at the ILA Memorial, they had the patient of the week. And that was the most interesting thing, actually. The patient of the week was interviewed by the psychiatrist, psychoanalyst. It's closed circuit television. There was a whole group looking at it, and then you got a discussant, and it was open. It was very real, because the patient of the week was the patient. They wondered what to do with the patient. The patient had given permission for this, so they knew that was being filmed. And I found it fascinating to see the different style of the interviewers, and then the discussion around it. And one day I was Clifford Scott, So I saw him interviewing. I said, "My God, what is he doing? What is he doing?" So I rushed off to the couch. I had my sessions on the couch, and started to complain to Danger, Maurice, and said, complaining about this crazy guy, the way he was interviewing. I said, "Give him a chance." And since they don't say that much, you pay attention to the few words that being said. So he became my first supervisor, which means the longest supervisor.
Right.
And I had and so he was very original. I mean, very well read and original. And so I learned quite a bit from him, but he managed to get me into a knot. So when I came out of his session there, I just wonder, what hit me. And I still have that, I'm derailing you probably a little bit, but I've been running since 21 years a CEO seminar.
Great.
And I do it together with a psychoanalyst, anthropologist, novelist from India, who was actually also trained in Germany and also at Harvard.
And his name is?
Sudhir Kakar, who also has been quite influential to me as a kind of an older brother, the older brother role. And he's very famous in India. Anytime there's something about cultural, historical thing, the newspaper calls him. Written many books. One of his last books was burned, which is very good for book selling.
Yes, it is.
He wrote about Gandhi and this English lady, which was really a platonic relationship. Gandhi's sexual habits were sometimes quite strange. But so he was quite influential. Actually, my last book, which just is coming out, I think soon, The Hedgehog Effect, I've dedicated to him. Which was, after you had done your father, your mother, your brothers, whatever. So it's time, your children, your wife, the whole. And so it's time for him in many ways. But so he was at the time working with Erik Erikson.
Yeah.
That was
At Harvard.
At Harvard, yeah. But for a year actually, it was a year there. And he wrote a book at the time about Frederick Taylor.
The management theorist.
Yeah.
Yes.
He wrote a book about Frederick Taylor. It was a project actually, what originally was initiated by Selesnik. They were going to do it together, but Selesnik didn't do anything, so he said, "It's your book," which was gracious of him. So that was his first book. His first book, I remember. But I'm derailing you.
I want to actually go back.
You asked for influence. So here is
no.
We got some influence.
I asked for that. You started by talking about your mother and your paternal grandparents and their effort to
maternal.
I'm sorry. Yes, to save Jewish people during World War II when you were quite small. I understand that your mother and your grandparents were both named righteous Gentiles.
Yes.
So they were rather significant in their efforts. Most of what you know about that, though, is what people have told you.
Yes. Yeah. That's too young.
What kind of an impact do you think that knowing about that had on you?
I think very strong because of my emotional reactions when I talk about it.
Yeah.
I think it's. I guess it's a pattern when you think about your life that things which are not right. I think the whole issue of fair process, and of course people doing horrible things to other people. I was just reading a review about the book of Pinker, about I forgot the title, but basically said that we have become nicer over the centuries. Did you read the book?
No.
It just came out. It's Pinker. He's a professor at Harvard.
Yeah.
And it's apparently it's a significant book about, even though in spite of the Holocaust and things like that. But of course this whole issue of the Holocaust but my mother, was an element of, it was such a traumatic experience that she would tell the stories over and over, talk about oral history over and over again. So my brother and I couldn't stand it anymore. We got so tired of those stories. Stories like, you had what's called the Grüne Polizei, which is the green police, which is, I think, probably some kind of SS group, who would enter the house, and I was there playing, but underneath, there were all those people, and it's small children. You get very anxious, that you would say the wrong things, and so the anxiety, the level of anxiety was very high about that. And then, of course, the horrible things what happened. People got shot. I mean, my grandparents are buried in this small village, and just behind it is this kind of a big, tombstones of a bunch of people who got shot by the Germans at the time.
Mass graves.
Yeah. Not really master, something like they shot 6-7 people.
Yeah. I talked to several of your colleagues and who told me that based upon what you heard about that experience, that you spent most of the rest of your life trying to deal with bullies and unfairness and inequity. Is that a reasonable conclusion?
Not necessarily conscious, but I mean, I've also been, even in the professorial profession, I've seen also a lot of abuse of professors and abusing students and things like that in many ways. So I also believed in, like I felt that was Selesnik at the time made a generous gesture to Sudhir, that's your book, things like that,
right.
That people are expropriating. I've seen that too many times. So I pride myself that the people who have worked with me have really developed. I've been really in the development business. I've probably been the most successful one at my institution in that respect. I think developing people and get the best out of them, and giving them. I'm not a micromanager. On the contrary, I'm very much a manager in orbit, but giving a long rope. I got an honorary doctorate last week in Slovenia, and I gave a speech. Did I send you the speech? No, I should send you the speech.
No, I would like to see it.
It's a little reflective speech the next day Ed Shine got also an honorary doctorate. You might know about him. He's at MIT. Right. He was talking about me and my life, and he was talking about his experience with Douglas McGregor. He was the area or the department chairman. And he was going to teach a course was given by a man called Bavilas. You may have also heard of him, but he was a teacher. I have a book of him, so I've never met the man, and nor have I met Douglas McGregor. I was too young probably, and so he wanted teaching notes of Douglas McGregor of Bavilas, and Douglas, no, you do it yourself. And he said it was really, it was a real good experience. He gave me a long rope. I have to find my own way and do it. And said some certain things happen. And I think to some extent I believe in that myself. That. I will help people, but sometimes they don't know how good they are. So they have to manage their own anxiety. So let them run with it.
I talked to one of your colleagues, and I'm sure that I'm going to mispronounce her last name, Elizabeth Florent.
Florent, yeah. Florent. She's American, actually.
Yeah, she told me that
she's here.
Is she?
Yeah, she's here.
I look forward to meeting her.
Yeah.
She told me that. You had talked to her about something that your mother probably told you, and that was when you were about 11 years old in Holland. You wandered off with a friend. Your mother panicked. She's looking for you. The townspeople are looking for you, and they found you tossing stones at a bull.
I was 7 years old.
7 years old.
Yeah,
oh.
much younger.
I feel better about this than 11-year-old. I don't know better,
no,
but I mean.
7. I think I was probably 6 or 7.
And she said what was interesting about this story is that that your mother couldn't decide whether you were trying to scare the bull off or antagonize it, and she thought maybe that was sort of encapsulated your character a little bit. I wonder if you might reflect on that.
That's actually a very it's a good metaphor. I must be around I think I was 5 years old. I lived in a village. I was born in a village called Huizen, which is not a very original name. It means houses. That's it.
Yeah.
It was a place where on Sunday everybody walk around in these native dresses. The men wore like crows in black, and the women had those enormous caps. And there was a permeation of sin. Life was all sinful. You went to church a number of times. It was not a good atmosphere. It's now changed. When you come there now, you don't recognize it anymore. No more native dresses. They would take the vending machine away for cigarettes on Sunday because sinful. You weren't allowed to ride a bicycle on Sunday. It was sinful. You can't believe it. It was basically a fisherman and farmer community. It was in the South Sea at the time, where IJsselmeer now. And they had this big area where they would have the cattle. And so my brother and I, and not my brother, it was my cousin, who became actually a very famous journalist in Holland. He also very much influenced by my grandfather. He's dead now. I guess he drank too much, too many cigars and too much gin.
That would do it.
Which is, he got throat cancer. He wrote about this last year. Actually, we had an off-and-on relationship, meaning that we were both in different continents. But I tried to, we exchanged books, although his books were much more for a larger public. But he also had one thing like I have, this element of injustice which was there, but he was not a hero. So he was a year older than I was, and he was like crying his head off while I was happily throwing stones at the bull. And my mother, could talk about the golden CD syndrome, to quote Freud. You're the favorite of your mother, which I was. Not very good for my brother. She tells about a story with a sense of indignation and pride. He was a little nothing, and it was dangerous. There was a little ditch between the bull and us. And so the farmer found us there with the scream, and so you have to realize also, you get your imagination, in that village, when there was something especially happened, you had a rattle, how you call it?
Rattle, yeah.
Yeah, rattle. And so there would be the village rattle doing, and so they had done that, and everybody was looking for these two kids, what happened to them. So the farmer found us, and so my mother saw this bicycle, and the farmer coming with the two kids, and still alive. It's a great relief but it's an image which is to do with my somewhat probably people rebellious nature. I'm not very good with authority figures. I think one of the strongest things, and probably one of the reasons I became a professor. And of course I deal all the time with authority figures in my role in the CEO seminars, all over the place.
So your father worked well into his 90s.
Yes, it's also ridiculous in certain ways, but maybe he's a role model for me too. I'm going to his birthday tomorrow. Tomorrow is 99.
Oh my goodness.
But the last 3 years, he's off and on as far as his short-term memory is concerned. And unfortunately, I see him too late. When you can, in the middle of the day, it's okay, but he gets tired in the evening, so I don't know what I'm going to see. But I have to be at his 99th birthday, so I'll fly to Holland and see him there. My father was, my parents divorced when I was 5. My father, after the divorce, which is ironic because my mother saved his life. Anyhow, and it was the love of her life. My father was very clear. She never remarried, and he did a lot of business trips in Eastern Europe, particularly Czechoslovakia at the time, and he met a woman there, and he got her pregnant. It was actually 2 women pregnant. My mother was pregnant and he was pregnant. And so my mother was too righteous. It was not her, it was my grandmother, her mother. She should let it be, that happens sometimes. Evolutionary psychology, whatever excuses you might make. But it was not proper, and so my grandmother felt she should divorce, which was, in hindsight, a terrible idea, to be honest. Anyhow, he got too cheap divorced. I think he was in a period in time then he was very confused. He didn't know what to do. The 2 women, the one both pregnant, both pulling at him, not pulling at my mother, pushing him away, and the other one pulling at him, living in the Eastern Bloc. So he married her and he brought her to Holland. He got 2 children with her. It has always been a very difficult relationship. She never settled in the Dutch environment. So. My father was an entrepreneur. He was, and although he was not the owner, but he was the entrepreneur. There was a story about he started as a clerk in an office in Amsterdam, and then and during the war he moved to a house in his village was safer. Amsterdam was very dangerous because there were all those razzias, pogroms, whatever you might call it. And then the owner of the office died. But before the death, my father promised to take care of his children and his wife, and he did. He made them all millionaires. But he built up that place, so he was one of the big employers in the village. There were some other factories there, so he was. It was quite the man with the big cars, it was kind of. There was a fantasy about it, to be a businessman, to be an entrepreneur. So he had an important role, but he was an absent father, totally absent. He took care of us financially, but he was an absent father.
Did his life as a businessman have any influence on your career?
No, he made a comment which I had a hard time dealing with at the time. He once asked me what he wanted to be, and I said to him, I want to become like you. And he said, you're not a businessman. Your brother is a businessman. That was quite a blow, I felt. My God, I want to be. Actually, ironically, I became in a way a businessman. I became the head of the center for, the center, the build-up, made that 2nd largest in the world. So I made an academic business. But that was something, said that's not, apparently he doesn't think I'm that kind of person. And I think he was wrong. He was wrong. And he was not a good businessman. He was a very good businessman, not very patriarchal. But he he never made the next step. He would not, I wrote my dissertation on entrepreneurs. Unsurprisingly, and I was lucky that my first patient in psychoanalysis was an entrepreneur, which is unheard of, because they don't go into analysis usually, too busy doing things. But so I know a lot about the mindset of the entrepreneurs, and because it's so over the term. My brother became an entrepreneur, but he could have built it up to the next level, but he never did. He was finally pushed out by the sons-in-law of the, there were 2 girls and one boy in that family, and he's 65 years old. Because they want also to become CEO once, because my father never left. And so he did not lose himself. So he started the business alone and built it up, and actually from a financial point of view made more money.
And what was his business?
Same business.
Yeah.
The same, but he was in the man-made fiber business.
Oh.
So that was his business. But when you look at some paradigm shifts in that world, they didn't deal with it. They didn't deal with it properly. But maybe I was too long in the same business. It's taught me something about the element of when you're riding a dead horse, the best thing you can do is to dismount. And that's what I do as my executive. The time you have to dismount and do something, think out of the box, because maybe that business they're in is no longer effective.
It actually sounds like your father did have an influence.
He certainly had a strong influence. He was the absent father, sitting in my head. So he's a towering figure, the person with the big cars, and every 2 weeks he was probably allowed by his wife to take us out.
Oh.
So he would pick us up in one of those big cars, because my mother, we lived in very modest circumstances at the beach. My mother's fantasy at the beach, apartment at the beach. And it's nice in the summer sometimes, and the winter is blowing sand, and it's called Zandvoort, and it means sand is sand and voort is blown sand. That's exactly what it is.
Right.
So that's anyhow. But it was a good place for using your fantasy life, the dunes. I wrote a book which is not out yet, called The Shaman, Talking to the Shaman Within.
Oh.
Which is when I broke my back. Somebody must have told you that, and so I was lying flat, and I was probably high on morphine. On
a hunting trip.
Yeah, on a hunting trip. Yeah, bear hunting. It's not. I mean, let me assure you, it's not a killing. It's the wild place, and to being totally out of my depth. That's, I think, an important part, because usually I go to conference and people know me and we talk. But there I am totally the idiot in the operation. And also I'm a closet anthropologist and biologist. I would have been, when I was in high school, I was so good in biology that if the teacher would have a normalized distribution, he would have, and the highest grade is 10, he'd probably have to give me a 14. Because otherwise the whole class would fail.
Right.
So it's really, I should probably be a biologist, anthropologist, but I'm in a way I'm in that anyhow. I'm observing people. But I wrote this book, Talking to the Shaman Within, in which you get a sense of the kind of interactions you have through your life with different people. It was actually a reaction of my editor who said, stop writing, start knitting. I thought it was overproductive. So I don't knit. So that's the reason I wrote that book, which is a difficult book.
I'm going to ask you one more question based on that 1994 article and then move on. But just for the benefit of somebody who's going to listen to this, you said...
Who's going to listen?
Well, you'd be surprised, actually. You would be surprised. Describing some of the behavioral patterns and traits that make for effective leadership is one thing, but to explain how they evolve, we have to go beyond the obvious and ask deeper questions. Where does this vision and sense of mission come from? What is the source of charisma? How do these various traits develop? And then you sort of answer those questions, and then you wrap it up by saying, how is psychotherapy and I want to ask you a question, which is, how is psychotherapy and your related clinical approach different from or similar to other disciplines that look at leadership?
No, and I think there's some difference. I hate ideologies, so I get quite excited. I mean, think about psychotherapy. There have been so many different schools, from behavior to existential, whatever it might be. I just came from this conference at Harvard, or the Harvard coaching. They have all this. You have positive psychologists in now. You have all this, and I do anything that works. I mean, I'm easy about it. So I hate dogma, because dogma, you see it with religions, what misery it very often brings to the world. So that being said, I think I just like to give people an extra lens. I was interviewed this morning for a magazine, and the next interview will be Henry Mintzberg, and he hired me actually at McGill, and we have a very good relationship. He has a different way of looking at things, but it's and I think I sometimes say to use yourself as an instrument is an additional advantage when you do organizational consultation. I mean, at Shine, of course, he was quite exposed to sensitivity training groups and things like that, but he never had a clinical training. He's a social psychologist. And so I think I once remember walking with him through in Fontainebleau through the forest, and he said, he had written a review about my book, The Neurotic Organization, at the time. He said, too old to learn. He said, it's not never too old to learn. He said, too old to learn some of this. I think that's not right. I mean, I've been reading evolutionary psychology quite extensively lately, because I think it's interesting to add to my repertoire. So when you think about the courses I've been running at INSEAD for a while, one is the Consulting Coaching to Change, which now is a master degree. That took me 8 years, by the way, because the nerds had a hard time. But it has
8 years to get the master's degree accepted.
Yeah, because it was a joint venture with the best French business school called HEC. They had the masters, and then I de-hired them. That had not to do with the faculty, that had to do with the facility. So, and they all rushed off to Oxford to do a joint venture. And we didn't want to have brand confusion, so we had 2 degrees, PhD and MBA. And now, only because the faculty started to line up to be in the course, and they actually the nerds convinced the other nerds that it was worth a master's, now with a master's degree. But it goes automatically eventually. It's interesting. The light system in those rooms are right out of this room.
I'm going to stand up and turn the lights back on. So the recorder is still running.
And turn this off. Everything comes at the same time.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm turning this off here. I lost my thoughts somehow. Where was I?
You were talking about the degree that you took.
Yeah, but that's not what. Yeah, but what I'm saying is that underneath both courses, there's a lot of content, but also there is actually an immersion in short-term psychotherapy. But everybody there, like it or not, they will be dragged in. They cannot escape. It's part of the course, the way it is designed. And even though it's not completely explicitly stated, because they do it, I don't do it. It does happen because of the nature of the group work, the questions being asked, and also the literature they read to get involved in that. So when you think about brands, and at the moment coaching is a fad. Everybody's a coach. Everybody in the kitchen sink, everybody in a career, confusion, and there's also partially because of financial reasons, which is worrisome. So what I've developed is that I want my coaches to know when they're out of their depth, and it may be time to have the person see somebody else. So, but also in consulting, very often the questions asked not a real question. I mean, I've done a lot of work with the director of McKinsey. Probably I've quote unquote dealt with half of them or something like that. And why did they came to me? It had to do again to be better in asking questions and getting the ideas implemented. Because very often, as you know, there's great frustration, you do all the analysis and then it gets sitting there on the shelf. Of course, many companies use them as a kind of pushing, getting certain things through. McKinsey said this and we should do this, and that kind of dealing with their own insecurity. So that's the only thing I try to do. But it becomes very powerful because we're such narcissists. And like I'm talking about myself, people love to talk about themselves. They love, you know that as an historian. They love, you just push the button, off they go.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, the metaphor of the elephant, when you think about character as an elephant, the elephant is a narcissist, you see everything through your perspective. And it's very hard to help people learn that people may think differently, particularly also in the cross-cultural context where I operate very much. The elephant is also somewhat paranoid. Now, what is in the bushes? Is that a strawberry or is that a saber-toothed tiger? You know, evolutionary psychology. The elephant is into tit for tat. When you do something, that's really the performance appraisal system don't work very well. Do something to you and you do something back. And the elephant is lazy. It doesn't want to move very much. It likes where it is. So all those things make up your character.
So how were you able to persuade business executives that a man who bases his leadership analysis and training on psychotherapy was someone that they should talk to?
Talk their language. It's very simple. When you deal with patients, you don't engage in psychobabble or whatever. Even management babble. I think I was always pride myself that I read relatively clearly compared to many other people in the field, which I learned actually is in a period I was I had I call it a column in a newspaper. It was the Dutch newspaper, so a large circulation. So I had to write simple messages. It was actually exciting. It was a very good practice. And so speak their language is important. And I never actually use my. Many people know now, but I never mention the word I'm a psychoanalyst. Basically, I'm a consultant or a management professor, and I guess now. For example, group coaching as an intervention technique has become quite popular, so people know what they're buying. I mean, I just was in the UK not too long ago, and I did an intervention for a new CEO who wanted his team up and running. So I'd always say, give me a mildly neurotic team, not crazy, mildly neurotic, and make something out of it in a few days. So I will go to Australia in a few months and do the same thing. I don't do it too many times, but it's fascinating to. And a little bit now how to codify what was had been my obsession over the last years, the knowledge of my coaches, because the coaches are doers and they don't stand still and say, what am I doing? So we had a whole series of books which are forced on them actually, Coaching Couch, Coaching Kaleidoscope, and now Tricky Coaching. And then I wrote this book called The Hedgehog Effect, using the metaphor of Schopenhauer, of the two hedgehogs in the winter, trying to get closer, but how close can you get before you hurt each other?
Right.
So that's really a metaphor for the human condition. But all those 4 books were really an attempt on my part to codify a little bit what I call the clinical approach, which is actually a euphemism for somewhat psychodynamic approach. But again, when you talk about psychoanalytic, psychodynamic, people have too much a sense of this bearded gentleman in Vienna with a heavy, like my accent, whatever language I speak, is a heavy Germanic accent. Yes. And so and since I feel that psychoanalysts have been their own worst enemies very often, I don't want completely to identify with that.
So is part of the way you approach things, business, number 1, to speak their language, number 2, keep it simple?
I keep it very simple. That's partially probably the Dutch. Actually, in some of my classes, they have an expression now. We're going Dutch now, which means we're going to keep it no bullshit, straight. Because the Dutch is a very low context country. Actually, my wife, who's not Dutch, who's Swedish, sometimes too boorish. You know, the Dutch love my institution, so the large numbers come there. I think percentage-wise, it's the largest group of people coming to INSEAD and all over the world. But they are not easy. They don't bullshit, you know. They tell you they don't like things. Bang! They hit you over the head. And I think have become. I give my students 2 rules in their work. I say one is the Hippocratic rule: do no harm. Right. And the other one is strike when the iron is cold, not hot. Cold. When it's too hot, people don't hear. They don't hear. They basically all the defenses go up.
Yes. I talked to one of your colleagues, Katharina Balasas.
Katharina Balas, yeah.
Balas, okay. And I asked her what kinds of questions I could ask you to get you to talk about yourself. And she said, ask him the same question that he so effectively asks others. This is the
nasty
question.
Comment, yeah.
She said, what makes you mad, bad, sad, and glad?
Actually, I had to, explaining what I do is not easy. Yeah. And I have too many experiences when I run my CEO seminar that are the first 3 people say, did I sign up for this? But I liked it, whatever it is, but they signed up for it. So I finally made a video and I wrote a script. And so I can show people my style of intervention, which is actually quite in your face compared to Now you have the CCL, Center for Creative Leadership, which is the McDonald's of leadership coaching. I'm more a boutique approach, the more boutique approach. I want people to be aware of certain things, but otherwise, do your own thing. I'm not a control freak, and I'm quite directive. And in the film, the video, she probably saw it. I asked, of course, what gets you, the element mad, sad, bad, and glad. Of course, Darwin had a few more emotions like disgust and things like that. Was also among the basic emotions.
Right.
But I asked questions, things like, what regrets do you have? Describe situation, events that that change your life in a significant way. Question like, if you could spend a day with a person dead or alive, who would you spend a day with and why? What was it like? What was the family dinner like? Or maybe you didn't have a family dinner, they were sitting at television, looking at television. But questions like that, what's the dumbest thing you ever done? What complaints does your spouse have about you? So those kinds of questions are different questions, start the dialogue. So I do that. Depending on the mood. I also find it very useful in my work and taking off from the Bloomsbury group, that crazy group of artistic, Virginia Woolf, etc. They would play games like, imagine that this person is an animal. What animal would you pick? And it's a very nice way to become playful in a group setting, because I have to create what's sometimes described as a transitional space, where people are willing to play and use more the right side of their brain. And so the metaphor, this person is a beaver, he's always busy, it's a giraffe. Why? His head above the clouds, he's not really there. But it becomes a playful atmosphere, and people start to, in a group setting, finally deal with the issues that have been sitting there for years. Yeah. To me, a very interesting example was many years ago. I was doing intervention in a bank in a faraway continent, and I had there were the top 30 people. It was a new CEO, and wanted this whole thing up and running. And we divided the group: investment bank, the retail bank, and the board, the executive team. So one person said at one point, the two of us have been working for 28 years. I know more about your strengths, your weaknesses, why you do certain things in 2 days than in 28 years. And it was one of the saddest comments I could think of, because people had never had a real conversation. And so what I try to push people towards is that they have courageous conversations, really deal with the issues. And when I think about my CEO seminar, very often after the first week they run home, and they have certain things to deal with their significant others, but also they have some discussions with people at the office. Take a person for lunch and talk more about just the weather and sport and politics, and start to understand the inner theater of their people. How can you get the best out of them? Why do certain people behave the way they do? And I think that's quite exciting.
And so once they begin to get a sense of what their inner theater is all about, how does that translate into effective leadership?
Now, if people come to me, Philip, and say, I want to become a charismatic leader in one easy lesson, I tell them...
Do you have a pill?
I say that actually. I don't have that pill, and anybody who sells you that must be... Don't come to me. And anybody who sells you that is a snake oil salesman anyhow. But if you want to learn more about yourself, as a result start to act towards your people in a different way, they might act different to you and might affect the whole organization. Yes, this is the right place to go. So that's what happens. The old statement above the Apollo about the temple of Apollo in ancient Delphi was written, know thyself, and that's still very true. If you really want, you are the best instrument yourself. And that's the reason I said using yourself as an instrument, meaning that's a nicer way of saying, what are your counter-transference reactions, to use a clinical terminology. Now, what does the person do to you? You as an interviewer, what are you doing to me, and how does what's going on? What are the dialogue? What are you thinking of at the moment? What you have in inner voice talking to yourself. So all those things are a number of dialogues going on.
I have to admit, I've never interviewed anybody before who's a professional interviewer himself. So this should be an interesting dynamic.
No, it's the question of what are the fantasies and how do you deal with those fantasies, and so this. And of course, the problem is that you very often deal with cloud issues. I call cloud issues. Like now you have the cloud computing, where you have cloud interpretation, which makes sometimes group sessions very difficult, because apart from the one-to-one, first one person in my technique is put in the limelight, is sitting quote unquote hot seat, and but I do it very delicately. No one should get hurt, do no harm, and so it should be. In that respect, I'm a positive psychologist. Appreciative inquiry. You have to. People know when they get 360 feedback from everybody around them what they're not good at. I already know it for years, by the way. They have performance appraisal session, but I try to create tipping points, and you don't get it by beating people over the head. Quite influenced by motivational interviewing. I don't know if you know anything about that. It's a technique of helping people change, particularly on drug addicts, alcoholics, people who may have to make lifestyle changes like bypass operation, and people sent by the court, so not the easiest people. And it's a very interesting technique, and I believe it in every medical school. The medical doctors should have some of that, because when I look, I've been exposed to the medical profession because of my back quite extensively recently, the last years, but I think it's getting better, by the way. They start to realize it, but here in France, not here in England, but in France, sometimes it's atrocious about this vertical, the hierarchical, and all the. I don't want to go there. Sorry. So I use metaphors, lots of questions to get people to talk. After it is not needed anymore. It goes they are there. They are in that space, and they go automatic pilot, and they start to talk about the real issues. Part of it came. I was working with an investment bank, and I was giving them at that time 360 was still a novelty. Now everybody does 360. And so people saw all those curves and some of the comments, written comments. But then say, you come from Greece. Can you say something? How the hell did you end up in whatever Goldman Sachs? So people start to tell stories, and that's an important role of a leader. When you look now, for example, the meltdown of leadership, to some extent in Europe. My heroine has been Mrs. Merkel, but she's not doing a great job lately, and she has to be better in storytelling, telling to the Germans that the European idea is not a cash register. We had no war for 30 years. We have not been fighting. A whole generation has grown up without war. And of course, and you also have to tell them, listen, the Greeks did something funny, you shouldn't retire at 55 because you deal with chemicals like the hair cutters, color material. Of course not, but there's something bigger behind it. And anyhow, she's getting there now. Sorry, I was just, but I see.
I'm actually going to ask you about that in a few minutes, but
I see her mucking around, and she's getting there. But of course, Mrs. Merkel doesn't have the same power as Sarkozy, the leftover of Charles de Gaulle.
Yeah.
So the president has lots of power. And Mrs. Merkel has to manage all those states and those parties to keep in power. So it is a very delicate pas de deux to go there. Sorry, that's people tell me I give lots of speeches. And I've been told I spread a perfume. I don't give a speech. Good presenters say, I'm going to say 3 things. You say the 3 things, repeat the 3 things. I'm all over the place. So I always say, when you're not confused, you don't know what's going on. So that is your problem as an interviewer, to keep me in line, because I always try to escape to make side tours.
I can do that. But do you think one of the qualities of an effective leader is the ability to tell stories that resonate with the followers?
Now, leaders, to quote Napoleon, are merchants of hope. They speak to the collective imagination of their people to create a group identity. That's an important function, and you don't have to be charismatic, sitting on a beer crate and scream and so on. Simple storyteller was, of course, Reagan. He was a very simple storyteller. He was lazy in many ways, but he knew he picked good people. He picked smart.
Yes, he did.
Obama, of course, has, when you talk about the most powerful person in the world, he's in a way too nice. He's too nice. When you get a knee-jerk reaction of your Republicans, of which a bunch of totally should be in a nut house, it's remarkable. What happened to the role model of the world, the greatest country in the world, as you would like to say in America, and seeing them mucking around. When he says yes, they say no. In that respect, you have to learn from that. Don't be conflict avoidant. Bang, he's learning.
You think he is?
Yeah, he's learning. Yeah. He's learning, but it's coming at a high price.
So, if you could advise him, what would you tell him?
I certainly would coach him to be much more assertive about it. and not try to be always the harmonizer, because sometimes, let's face it, most organizations are not democratic institutions, particularly on business organization. And you can, I'm a great believer in co-creation, to tap the brain of everybody. Let me give you an anecdote. Many years ago, I was interviewing a man called Khodorkovsky. You probably haven't heard of him, but Khodorkovsky was the richest man in Russia, and he's now locked up. He's a symbol of Putin. Putin locked him up. Remember, you come back?
Yes.
So he was the richest man, and he was at the height of his power. So I went to the building there in Moscow, went through all the security. And there he was, a little man in a leather jacket, big television screen there at the back with CNN, whatever. And he said, what kind of organization you're trying to build? I said, at that time BP was still, Heroic was the best, not that you see out there, the come and go organization. He said, I want to become like BP. He said, how many people do you have in your organization? He said, 100,000. But he said, I pay 100 people to think. Now maybe, you can say, okay, 100 people think, you don't want people to be, security is fairly important.
Right.
I said, but in BP I had just written a case study, about the CEO of BP. Said they try to have more people think, and he had a big argument about whatever. And so it is important. So that's it was a top-down organization, like many of the organizations there. I like to tap as much people. If there's one thing which is universal in human being, they want to be heard. They want to have voice. So, but at one point in time, you have to make a decision. And that's so Obama has to give too much voice and not enough decisions. Particularly with a very, I don't know how that evolved, very obstinate opposition in this way, to say the least. The Tea Party, which is a bunch of, do you want to privatize the police force? Privatize the army? Why not? And of course healthcare, which and you look at him, we are now in politics, but actually he has, for a president in this short time, he has done a hell of a lot.
Yes,
a hell of a lot. I don't think any other president has done so much in such a short time.
So when you look at a leader, though, is one of the things that you're looking at the way they balance the opportunity they give their followers to voice their opinions against their ability to make decisions? The
problem is, we live in an age of short-termism, and that's one of the problems, because every day you get your opinion poll says this. My God, it's a bit like, of course, CEOs. What's their biggest problem? That was, of course, the investment analyst and quarterly reports, but you have to manage that. Nokia has been off and on, but in the beginning, Jorma Ollila was the CEO at the time. He managed that. He said, maybe we don't have the expected earnings, but we're investing for the future.
Mm-hmm.
This whole managing for economic decline business, and that is, of course, then I feel the problem has been with him. I met many investment bankers in my life. They make a lot of money in a very short time, and of course they say, I'm mortgaging my life for 10 years to become a multimillionaire, and then I will do good works. In America, they try to buy a Senate seat, like one of the CEOs of Goldman Sachs did, or for 200 million was it? I don't know what it was, quite a steep price. Or I do this, become a representative, or I become Paulson, I become second. So they mean well consciously, but unconsciously. There is, you look at the number of people who come from the investment banking community hovering around there. They can't help it.
When I talked to Elizabeth Florin,
yes,
she said one of your strengths as a scholar and a communicator is that you're focused on your message. So how would you encapsulate your message? What's the message that you try to get across?
No, this message is a very simple one. I get quite horrified that the bankers haven't learned anything. They have no memory, have not learned anything. To do my site expansion, I'm a visiting distinguished professor in Berlin, and there was a conference there. On the conference on one side was Mr. Ackermann, who's the CEO of the Deutsche Bank, one of the more respected investment bankers. Other side was Mr. Morty. You probably haven't heard of him, but he is the chairman and chief mentoring officer of Infosys, the most respected company in Asia. Mr. Ackerman talked about bonuses and how difficult it was to get the right bankers for the bonuses, destroy the world.
Right.
On the other side, you had Mr. Murthy who said, I want to be the most value-driven company in the world. And he is a very value-driven company, an exciting company. And it was pathetic, I felt. I mean, I have forgotten everything and learned nothing. So the message I'm trying to say is, you should have profit with purpose, not that you say, okay, I'm now going to screw the world financially and then going to give the money to the Cancer Society. That's not good enough for me. That's my message.
I want to ask you some questions about writing. I'm going to come back to the message in a minute, but everybody that I talked to about you had something to say about your writing and your relationship with your writing and your sense of the impact of your writing. Elizabeth Florin used a French phrase which I got her to translate for me, which translated into "I write, therefore I am." Katharina Blasas said that writing is your overriding passion, and Roger Lehman said that you were a writing machine. He was a little bit more direct. I'll turn the page over to the question I want to ask you. So, what does the act of writing mean to you?
I think, of course, the cogito ergo sum. It's. I think so. I am. It's something very true. I realize how important writing is for my mental health. That was not always. I mean, at the beginning, I had a very hard time writing. I had some, I went from constipation to diarrhea, to use this kind of metaphor. I think it was when I was working with Selesnik, because I realized later on that Selesnik was not an easy writer. He was a very difficult writer. But I had to try to identify with him. I did a book with him called Power and the Corporate Mind. It was my first book. And it was difficult. And he would say to me at times, it's no good. But he wouldn't tell me why. So I said, no good, great. It's like you get 360 feedback, you're an idiot. So I mean, what can I do about it? That kind of thing. So it's, I don't like the color of your eyes or whatever, your hair. So I had a fairly hard time. But it went, then I once read something about Sir Bernard Shaw, who said, I almost became a good, he worked in a bank apparently. And I got good at it, said, but I want to write, so, but I had problems with it. So finally decided, just write anything. So my writing, when I really write, I am totally obsessed. I roll out of bed, it can be 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock. Usually I like it to make 5, it's almost some sleep, because I don't go to bed that early. And I basically, half asleep I write. With 2 fingers, by the way, I cannot type. I have 2 fingers, but it adds up. People look at me, it's surprising. I've written something like 35 books, I think, by now.
With 2 fingers?
2 fingers. Now, first I was by longhand. And I was probably one of the last people who stopped with longhand, till finally one of my deans, Dean of Research, said, it's crazy. They're having retyped and retyped and retyped. Get yourself in so I got one machine. So I know 2 fingers, and it is, I feel it's like, it's really important for my mental health. And particularly, most of my writings have been questions. People would ask me questions, I have no idea. A student or whatever asked me questions, and I started to think about it, and think about it, and think about it. And like, for example, I wrote a paper not too long ago about the rescuer syndrome. And I was thinking about all the people I have in my consulting and coaching class, and they try to rescue people. It's all related to this book, Tricky Coaching, in which people have to send in problematic cases. And I was reading those guys, my God, what are they doing? I mean, are there no boundaries? I mean, they go far too far. They shouldn't go there. And so you have these people who are these obsessive rescuers. And so I started to think about it and look at it, where does it come from? And do a different permutation. So that's the way I work. And many of my books initially were articles. Very few books were not started as an article. And so I got one article, another article, and so then suddenly it became a book. I would love to write a novel. That's the closest to it really has been the book, my strange book, Sex, Money, Happiness and Death, which is not so strange if you think about it, because when you look at my CEOs, in the end they talk about sex, actually no, that's sex, we talk about relationships, money, happiness and death, and they put power in there, it's related, it's woven through it. So those are major life issues, and and probably my book, the Talking to the Shaman, was in. But novel,
Why would you like to write a novel?
But the problem is I'm not like a Nabokov, or who. English used to be my third language, and so I always feel a sense of insecurity about.
But you write in English. Is that
I
right?
write in English. I think in English. I dream in
Dutch,
English.
French, English.
German. German used to be my second language because my grandmother was German.
Mm-hmm.
So they spoke quite some German in the house. So it was my best language. I was fluent in it, but not any. I understand it perfectly, but I'm not speaking. I need some time. So English I learned later, and so it's never this complete confidence about. I used to write poetry when I was a student, but it was in Dutch, and thus you really can play with language. Maybe I should write. I did some haiku in my last book. I wrote a few haiku. Try to experiment in English haiku. So to experiment with that. But that's a little bit. So I write relatively boring books. Sometimes they're readable. Better readable than most management books. Most management books are boring.
You're right. I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but I mean, you write very, very clearly and engagingly. I enjoyed everything that I read. Do you? But why the novel? I mean, is it a different kind of creativity, or something, a new frontier, or a new boundary, or?
Yeah, it's in a way.
You're still throwing stones at the bull?
Yes. I mean, I basically reinvented myself a number of times. I mean, first I was an economist. I was going to be a banker. I did become a banker. Then I became a professor of management. Then I became a psychoanalyst, and then I became a manager to build up that center because I had a dean at the time. He's no longer the dean anymore, but I was a cash cow. I was the only center to make money, and he dragged everything out. So I had to create a virtual organization and really get the loyalty of the people for free, because I didn't have the resources, and I got that. They benefited from it. It's not that I was taking advantage of it, but I had to get the best out of them, and I couldn't really pay them for that. And now I'm I resigned this year as a director, which I was really overextended. Over the last 5 years, I probably was working 3 books all the time at the same time, which was too much. Then I was running the center, then I have to run my courses, I did some consulting. And there you talk about life-work balance. It's a joke. I mean, I'm a little bit of a workaholic, so that's very true. But I do what I like to do. So it's not that it's not like I go to the factory, the salt mine. There we go again. Right. But when it becomes too much, when I talk about reflective space and dealing with lives of people, where I have a responsibility for like my CEOs and also not to that extent the people in the other program. You need also some time for yourself, because you're a garbage can. Everybody throws garbage in you, and you have to metabolize it. I got an email yesterday, which got into the junk file, and I know now why. I was thinking about why this email of Manfred students get into it, because he talks about some of his sexual issues in it. So they say, "Oh, it's pornography, so bang, it's filtered." Yes. That must be the reason. Because. And I think about the poor guy. I sent it 14 days ago, and he sit there and I don't react. He said he was talking about how ashamed he is of himself, whatever he was doing, joined the crowd, I guess, going to some porno sites and having an adulterous relationship.
And it was sitting in the garbage or the spam filter.
Yeah, spam filter. Yes. And so I still feel about it. So when I was going through, I had no time. I was traveling too much. So finally, sometimes you find something there. So I went through it. I found some of this email, which is an attachment, and I read it. I said, "My God!" Now we're all human. When you do a test, for example, a number of people there, and so what are the things you really, really don't want to talk about, because you think you are unique in that. Now, what is the thing? Number one, I see you. Number one, there I am running a large organization, and I'm just a fake. I wrote once an article about feeling like a fake. I'm just a fake. I'm just an imposter, and people don't see it. I'm going to be found out one of these days. That's one biggie. The second one is, there I seem to have very good family relationship and things like that. But the relationship with my close one really that intense? Are they good enough? Do I have a real good relationship with my spouse or my children or whatever? No, that's I doubt it. Number two. Number three is your sexual theater. And if you think about sexual theater, how many permeations can you have? So it's not too glorious. So that's it. So join the human race. So I wrote him a note and said, join the human race. I mean, calm down. Of course, not the nicest that he had an affair when his partner was not in very good shape, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's not decent behavior necessarily. But again, join the crowds. When you do look at statistics, most people are not saints. And actually, saints. It's probably good for people sometimes not to be a saint.
So is that one of the things that you try to get across to your executives? Is it nobody's perfect?
No, usually, that's right. But I don't. The sexual dimension, even though the book is called Sex, Money, Happiness, I usually don't. In a plenary session, it's not a good thing to do. As Mike, I've learned that hard experience.
Probably
not. People regress to when you were a kid. I show mine and you show yours. So when someone is become quite explicit about his sexual theater, and he expects or she expects from the others to reciprocate, and they just look at this person, that's not good. So, I do in spite of my colleague, this Sudhir Kakar, who after Sir Richard Burton, the discoverer of the Nile, even not really discovered the Nile, did the annotated bibliography of the Kama Sutra. So he has when he was a professor at the University of Chicago. So the joke always about him, and usually to the, it was in the Department of Religion, by the way.
Do you find that your approach to leadership and coaching works across cultures?
Yes, I have no problems with it. I was telling that I just came from Malaysia. I was working with the senior civil servants. Yeah, there's no problem. Actually, what I've discovered, in spite of the Americans have a tendency to tiptoe around. I'm at a school which has no national identity. Initially at the school, the biggest group were the British and the French. Now it is Chinese and the Indians. That's the way, the nature of the beast. We are in 3 continents. I have realized that we are much more in common than we have different. But of course you have this, books like The Ugly American and people, but on the other hand, you also have this kind of stereotyping of culture. Culture is so nuanced. You say the French are like this, the British are like this. And there are of course certain patterns, but certain patterns are universal. Like I said, people, even in the highest power distant culture, like Malaysia, people want to have voice, want to be heard. Mm-hmm. So, and then you need some intellectual curiosity. What is about other cultures that you are curious about it? There are differences. I mean, I've been struggling until recently with Abu Dhabi. How to have the right leadership coaches for my center in the Middle East, because my experience has been that people with a Muslim background have a much harder time to talk about their background in a group situation. It's in one-to-one, fine, it's no problem, they talk about anything. But in a larger group situation, it's very private. There's a lot of paranoia about. So you need other kinds of coaches, and you also the element of what also not very useful is that people, when they start to talk about their past, start to blame their parents. Now you're now 50 years old. I mean, that's a few years ago. So it's time to. And so I say, listen, your father might have been a shit, the way he behaved, but you must have, the reason you're here must be a reason for that. He must have given you some good things too, which is called in Japanese called Naikan therapy. Look at the positives, not like appreciative, but some things he gave you. Why don't you think about that a little bit? And what elements did you get from him? Or from her, from your mother? One thing which is very important I find in my CEO class is not just the business, but also what kind of situation you have in your private life. Are there lots of odds and ends? Because life is very fragile, and certain opportunities will not come back. And some people are in a stalemate with their parents or their brother and sister for years. And you can change, they cannot change. But maybe when you change, they might change a little bit. Get out of the box.
When I talked to Eric Vandeloo, he had an interesting way to describe you. He said Manfred Kets de Vries is like a Hazan.
Okay.
Hazan, Hazan. It's a singer in a communal service in Judaism who leads the singing. He said he could sing better than the rest of us. He sings something that appeals to us. He also gets to pick the songs there are not many Hassans of his caliber.
I see. That's funny. He's the one who said I spread around perfume, which I felt was a very good metaphor.
I had a very interesting conversation with him because we were on long distance, and I was having trouble with his accent until I realized he was having trouble with mine. So but I enjoyed my conversation with him.
Eric is he's the one, it was Eric, Roger and myself who set up the CCC program, which has been a great success. And they are now running with it. I give a cameo performance, but I can do. I mean, it's now 2 continents, and chatting back and forth. They're younger, let them do that. I just opened the program in Singapore, and he is a clinical psychologist who went through psychological training in Holland, which is a horror. 10 years of being beaten up, which is I make jokes about it, but he stuck it out. He said it there. Roger is also a psychoanalyst. Who was actually working for the American Army originally, I think, in Frankfurt, and then he became a psychoanalyst, and then now he is also jetting around the world. So it's a funny subgroup of analysts. I was the founder of an organization called International Society for the Psychoanalytic Study of Organization, ISPSO, which I always fantasized a very open door policy, no religious. That's now actually grown quite a bit. And a lot of people who are interested in the interface between. Of course, some of them are totally psychobabble types, far too academic. So they will never be able to relate to any business executive because they. Now, typically, I was one of this conference last week in Boston. I met a psychiatrist. He said, "It's terrible to be a psychiatrist. Or people run to you and tell all the problems they have, or they run away from you because they're afraid to see your perversions." So I mean, it's true. It's just difficult. So you have to. People have the, and I think the media has made it also. Analyze this. Those kinds of movies.
Right. Well, when I talked to Eric Vanderloo, he said that he described your work as a kind of light form of going into psychotherapy for those who are receptive and capable of personal transformation. And what I'm interested in is, do you see your work, as the point of your work, as personal transformation?
No, I always say that I want things to happen. I want oomph, whatever that might mean. I want to create tipping points. And now the leadership development is, look here, 801 people are supposedly here. And they have all those leadership programs, but very often nothing happens. I mean, maybe you have a temporary array, and then you go back to your work and you go back on automatic pilot. So it also implies that if you want a leadership development activity, it can be a one-shot deal. It can be because people have a tendency to regress and go back to normal. So they have to be reminded. It's like behavior modification. And I give lots of lectures, and maybe sometimes I touch a person in a lecture, and I'm pretty good at it. And give me an entertaining, the perfume. I spread the perfume and lots of images and whatever, and lots of cartoons. So I get people usually stay quite alive because I get so bored with lectures. I get instantly bored. I have very little sixth life. So it's my own problem. Although I can sit very long times writing, but playing with ideas in my head, but sitting there and listening to sometimes the obvious is not for me. I want to have an effect on the life, and that's one of the why I'm not a dean. I should have been a dean. I mean, many times asked to be a dean. I got asked to be a dean because deans are bored finance and economics professors who cannot stand anymore for the 30th time to do finance or statistics 101. So they got a dean, and I don't know. When I enter a classroom, for example, my CEO seminar, I have certain things. I give a few lectures to give them some security. But it's actually wrong to give a lecture. I don't know what's going to happen. And that's when I talked about the element of the ability, when I talked about Clifford Scott, my first supervisor, to hold the confusion. It's sometimes called negative capability after Keats, poet, to when I sit in the class and a person makes a presentation, I say to myself, what the hell is going on? I don't understand. I have no sense of what's going on. I'm completely confused. But I know that if I'm patient enough, it eventually will come, and the class will help me. The class will help me, because my first question is always to the participants. They want to solve a problem. That's the reason they are CEOs or whatever. I said, no, you're going to do it in the bar, you're going to do it at dinner time, breakfast, you're going to solve the problem. It's an interesting one, you'll solve it for him. But I want to know, how do you feel? Are you bored? You're looking outside. I said, my God, I don't like to be outside. I will walk outside. You get angry, you get seduced. What is happening to you? You have a crazy fantasy. I want to hear that. And that's what, and so then slowly, because of those crazy fantasies in the comments, you get a gestalt and you say, okay, those are the issues the person is struggling with. Underneath what the person says he's struggling with. And that is, the whole issue of using yourself as an instrument. Basically, practicing and practicing and practicing. That's and that I hope to affect on my students. And you can see it, the personal transformations taking place in the program.
Most of your work has been with corporations, with business. And, many of the folks who study leadership tend to focus more on not-for-profits. And you've been incredibly prolific. Have you ever run into a situation where colleagues become envious of your success or envious of your association with business leaders? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Envy is always there. It's the suppressed emotion. I try to de-emphasize it, but the envy is an emotion which is always there. It's the dark emotion, the Iagos of this world are there. How to manage it? One way, of course, the one-downsmanship. That's one you can do. That's what you do usually.
The one-downsmanship?
Yeah, one-downsmanship. Yeah, that's. I have a very difficult time with compliments. Actually, I don't like it. This was a kind of funny week for me because I got this award of excellence in Boston. I got an honorary doctorate there, and so then they list all the things I've done, like you did a little bit, and it makes me always very itchy. To be very, very frank about it, makes you.
I noticed you were looking away when I was reading your.
I get quite itchy. On the other hand, we are no strangers to narcissism. And of course, academics are the worst characters they're very good in character assassination. I remember when I was at the Harvard Business School, I wanted an appointment there at the time. And I had written a book with Selesnik, so obviously I couldn't write alone, that was already clear. Mm-hmm. If I would have written a book alone, if that was he's not a good colleague, he's not collaborative. Whatever you do, you're damned. And it's very easy. And I remember also the time one well-known professor at the school said he will never write anything. Maybe I needed him. I thanked him actually in one of my books. He's still hanging around there. My hero, J. Lorsch, I still can mention his name. You might have heard of him. Yeah. He so it's real great. But maybe I have to be thankful to him. It was really saying prove the bastard wrong. Mm-hmm. That's. But to be more serious about it, as I said earlier, I sometimes describe myself as a schizoid individual. In the British sense, it means introvert. Mm-hmm. I'm a very private person. I'm a pseudo extrovert. I've learned to become an extrovert. Actually, most CEOs actually somewhat more on the introverted side, but they have learned to become more extrovert.
A cocktail party extrovert.
Yeah, exactly. So the pseudo extrovert. So I need, if you cannot be alone, you will be very lonely. So I need, when I was sitting at those events here, all those people, I need to be by myself. And there's very few people I can be alone with, not lonely, they don't have to say anything. So that's important to me. Mm-hmm. And I think the ability to play with ideas. Mm-hmm. I guess my most productive, I used to live on Boulevard Saint-Germain in Paris, and actually my most productive I was just walking down the boulevard and having a walk, just playing with ideas, thinking about it unconsciously.
Is that what makes your life worth living, the opportunity to play with ideas?
Yes, I think it's an important part. Mm-hmm. I also like nature. We started off with saying something about it, but I'm brought up in the country, and so I could lie on the ground and look at ants moving. Mm. I was reading this book Ant Hill by Wilson. I don't know if you said this book, which was a bestseller, And you see how he was fascinated. It's an autobiographical novel, and about his fascination with ants. And I can very much identify with it. Looking at the animals, looking at insects, and sitting there and just observing.
You've been a hunter since you were a boy, right? In the Netherlands, and
yeah,
I read that you were the first person to fly fish in Outer Mongolia.
I was the world champion. Yeah.
You're a member of the New York Explorers Club.
Yes.
And I looked up your official biographical statement and the INSEAD faculty profile, and it says, in his spare time, he can be found in the rainforests or savannas of Central Africa, the Siberian taiga, the Pamir, Australia's Arnhem Land, or within the Arctic Circle. So what does hunting and fishing really mean? I mean, why do you do this?
I was, it's partially, on inner world. I'm thinking about writers sometimes when there are issues in the family. You start to withdraw. I think my mother was, the divorce was very. I was the oldest son.
One of your colleagues told me that you wrote because when you were working, you were able to get away from your mother. And as long as you open the door to that, I'm gonna ask you the question. Is that?
That's a very insightful comment. Yeah, because we had a very small apartment, and my mother was very engulfing. Was an engulfing mother. She loved me, but she was.
Mothers get paid to be engulfing, so that's all right.
But she was a very engulfing mother, so very in that respect. And I could close the door because he was studying. That was because I was designated student in the family. Well, my brother, the poor guy, was not a student in the family. So, but part of it also was then to get out of the house. So to get out of, in the beginning we lived actually at a house at Heather. It was a nature reservation, so it was very easy. Then later on we lived in an apartment, but again not very far from the dunes.
The Heather, you said?
The Heather, yeah. Heather is the...
the Heather, okay.
Heather, Heather and tree and forest.
I'm just trying to save the transcriber here. The Heather, I got it, okay.
Yeah. So I've also a fascination for Heather. When I see it in the stores and in the I buy it, and because it's associated with my mother actually, the Heather. But so it was a way of freedom to get, it was a joke about Erich Fromm, you must have heard of him, who wrote the book Escape from Freedom. And some people say Escape from Frida, was Frida von Reichmann, was his wife, his first wife. Yes. So that's the joke. So maybe it's the element of being away from. So I played a lot. You just crossed the road and you were in whatever. Holland is not a very wild country, but you were in the woods, the Heather and things like that. So I played there. So that has been, and at the time when people would ask me what I wanted to be, I said I want to become an explorer. So I've become an explorer of the mind instead, because I didn't feel like.
Do you think of yourself as an explorer of the mind?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. And my interest in nature is very related to that. I said before, if my parents would have been more academic and have looked at my interest at the time when I graduated from high school or during high school, they would probably have pushed me towards biology. I would be maybe one of those, you have the one whose name again, who was very famous primatologist, in a senior moment, The Inner Ape, and he wrote a number of books. Never met him actually, and before they had Tim Bergen, who won actually the Nobel Prize. But I would be in that neighborhood. But I would have been a very bad engineer for sure, because I'm not very handy. So I try to combine it in a way that one side you have my writing and my teaching, and the other side you have also my. I don't know that it related so much because I had this problem with my back, which now I think I finally dealt with it. But I would be found in. I really like wild places, really wild places.
What's the appeal?
I think it's not good enough to just look at National Geographic, look at television programs. It's the smell. I mean, as a child, I dreamt about going to places like the Pamir. I remember reading about Marco Polo sheep. Marco Polo and his big horns. So I went there many times. This is a very tough environment, but interesting. Mongolia was a serendipity. And my father gave me a book which he had saw in a shop in Czechoslovakia, in German, about fishing in Outer Mongolia. Nobody went fishing there, you went hunting there actually. So I read the book and I sent a letter to Ulaanbaatar, to the tourist office. I got a telex back, something like, please see our embassy in Europe. Europe is big. I discovered that actually it was an embassy outside Paris, not at the edge of Paris, so I went there and there was some young man, it was very communist time still. So we studied maps and I made an expedition. It was quite interesting. And I realized that there was this big trout there, the Hoedschotijmen. So I became the world champion Hoedschotijmen. Not very difficult, by the way, because nobody had done it. So, but it was interesting, this whole expedition, the real and serious communist time still. So, and then of course I got really fell in love with Africa because it's the smells and the sounds. It's kind of, so those things.
You were hunting in former Soviet Union?
Yeah, it was not the Soviet Union anymore. It was then, but it was in the Kamchatka Peninsula, which is probably one of the wildest areas in the world.
And you were injured, right?
Yeah, I got very bad. I'm very lucky I can walk because I should be in a wheelchair.
Oh. So, and I understand that you were pretty specific about how you wanted to be evacuated and where you wanted to be treated. You insisted on being hospitalized in France, is that right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's what the option when you're in Kamchatka, you're actually not too far from Japan or Thailand. You can go there, but I don't know anybody there. So actually, it was quite a horror story when you look at it. But I got the accident on top of a mountain, and I broke my back. Broke my spine, and then I had to get down from the mountain. So I was tied to a sled, and when you go down the mountain and pulled by a snowmobile, the snow got softer and softer going down, so it's like stuck in the mud. So zoom, zoom. So it was a 5-hour trip down the mountain. Finally came to camp. I rolled into my sleeping bag, and there was no painkillers apart from some few aspirins. And then I was lucky, lucky. It's the place where the bad weather is born, but I have a satellite phone with me. I didn't have a satellite phone, they had no satellite phone in the camp. So one guy climbed the mountain the next morning and got hold of the swinging reindeer village of Esso. Not Exxon, Esso. And it was decent weather because the helicopters, the big army helicopters. So the next day the army helicopter came to pick me up, flew me to Petropavlov. I mean, it was kind of tough, I was lying on this steel.
On the floor of the
helicopter. For the helicopter was steel. It's a very big army, so those things would crash regularly. And Petropavlovsk, I came there.
You're in a Chinook then?
What?
The things that crash regularly are Chinooks, yes.
Yeah. Now, but this, this old-fashioned, really big, old-fashioned helicopters. I remember once being in a helicopter there in the Pamir. They picked up some sheep, live sheep, they put them in there. I saw the hospital, that was like Dostoevsky, 19th century. So there's not a place to stay, blood on the floor, so I went to a local hotel. My daughter was with me, who was also here actually at the moment. And then I called, I have an insurance company in Denmark, and I called the insurance company, mobile phone, thank you very much. But also one of my students, who's a Russian oligarch, heard about it, so he was quicker than the insurance company to send a plane, pick me up. It was a Finnish plane, and send me to France. And then they made a lot of mistakes in the operation, so that I've been. I know I learned something about operations. If you have really complex things in France, you have to go to university hospital, not to the American hospital. Your American hospital is very efficient with credit cards and things like that. It was the university hospital. So they operated me this year. It was a 12-hour operation, serious operation, and then I got a hospital infection, so I almost died. So I make the joke about, I was giving the speech in Bled in Slovenia about Twice Born, William James Twice Born, Thrice Born maybe. I had two deadly ones in 3 years. It was quite, brings you back to, it's a little bit like the ILA. I mean, when I got this award, Lifetime Achievement Award, 2 people were dead. Warren Bennis came just out of the hospital. Was not in very good shape either. He looked very, very frail. And McGregor Burns was not with it anymore. And the only one, Frances Hasselbein, was the one who was really the life of the party. You know, she was peppy.
I know Frances.
Yeah, well, she was so much with it.
Yes.
You know, so much with it. So no, that's quite remarkable. I don't know. She must be around in the 80s. Huh?
Frances is at least 90.
Already 90, but she's remarkable.
I interviewed James McGregor Burns 2 years ago, and he was 90 then.
And it was okay when you interviewed him?
Yeah.
Because when we saw him then, he was not in very good shape.
Yes, he
was drifting off.
He looked fine.
I see. It's good to hear, because during that ceremony he was somewhere else. A little bit like my father now. Yeah. Tomorrow, when my prediction of my father.
Yeah.
You know.
Are you planning to go hunting or hiking again?
I already did.
Oh.
I already did. I went to Mauritius. I had to give a conference there, so I went hunting there. Yeah, I would like to. It's not. I mean, I tried to. I had this, this Shaman Within book, it's a dialogue about our evolutionary psychology and the hunting instinct. You can talk about it. And what I'm saying is a question. When you let children loose in the wild, you see how quickly they regress to the hunting mode and fishing mode. It's the question of exploration. That's really for me important. And it's a little bit of like small children's game, hide and seek. That's what it is. The killing. That's not really it. On the other hand, I mean, I wish there would be something like fishing, catch and release, but in hunting you don't have that. Right. It's a definite. On the other hand, just going to Africa and sitting in a car, called a safari, I find it very boring. I like to walk. I like to have a little bit the thrill of danger. And if it's done in a sustainable manner, that's important. It has to be sustainable. Because I'm the strongest protectionist of nature. It has to be sustainable. And that is, unfortunately, in certain countries, it's sad what's happening there. That's what worries me. And actually, that's ironically again that the fair chase, quote-unquote, hunters, to quote your president, Teddy Roosevelt, are probably the greatest protectionists. Yeah. They probably spend the most money, also resources, on trying to protect. And I can say it's self-interest, but better that than nothing. Right. Think about, you have Kenya, you have Tanzania. Kenya closed all hunting, the NGOs loved it. No elephants left, they're all killed, because when an animal has no value, they eat it.
Right.
Tanzania, if you're that crazy to shoot an elephant, I think you pay probably, I don't know, you pay $30,000-$40,000 for that honor. That money goes to the community.
Right.
So there's an interest. Why poach when you can have some kind of school, a new school?
Financial interest.
Yeah,
in
financial interest.
So
I said my little plea for the sustainability of it. So of course, something called Operation Campfire, which the money goes to the local community, and I believe in that.
You might get some donations off of this.
I'm not in that business.
Among your awards and honors, 2000, you earned a European Case of the Year award in the Human Resource Management Organizational Behavior category for a case you wrote called British Petroleum.
Yeah.
Transformational Leadership in a Transnational Organization.
Yeah.
Well, spring and summer of 2010, British Petroleum found itself at the center of an environmental disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, south of the U.S.
But I wrote a case, let me put it this again, that was under, what's the name, Simon. He was two presidents, two CEOs before, and companies, it sounds like a rationalization and defense, but I think he had a very interesting CEO at the time, Lord Simon now, it's not Lord Simon. Then you got the person who was successor, who had this little scandal around him, and then things started to change. Who built up the company, but it's a little bit like Murdoch, the Murdoch family, the kind of the subtle language you use to say this is allowed, this you can do, cutting corners, and I think something of that snuck in. But I don't know, I didn't follow, I get bored.
Oh. I was going to ask you, because most people have heard of the Gulf oil spill. If you could move forward a little bit in time and assess the leadership exercised by BP during that Gulf oil crisis, but
it was not. This was done. It was. I was one of our more prominent alumni was Sir David Simon, and he was the accidental president because he basically got it because his predecessor said he had a bigger head than everybody else, was smart than everybody else. He was doing a Jack Welch at the time with BP, and the people didn't like it. And so the board kicked him out, and so David Simon, who never thought he was going to become the CEO, became the CEO. He was our alumni, and I was always impressed by the way he could adapt, as opposed to some other CEOs. And then I by accident, got in the same plane with him, private plane. I forgot I was going to England or so, and I had a captive audience. He couldn't escape. So I talked him into to write a case about him and the company. And I remember walking here in London with him, and he said, see this building? Nobody there anymore. I took him with all this bureaucracy. Nobody to help. And then I saw him operating in a cocktail party, and I felt he was quite remarkable, how he knew everybody's name, the secretaries to whatever. And so I wrote a case about him. I met his successor, which Ivan Senior Moment, who famous for his ability to suppress that he was gay, which everybody knows, and so what the hell, who cares? But then he got a scandal about some preferences he gave to a young man, I believe. But apparently the culture started to change, the cutting corners. That was, I understand. And of course his successor, Hayward, was also not so smart about making certain statements to the press.
He's the one who said, I want my life back.
Yeah, I want my life back, and it was sailing also instead of, it's not very good.
Well, let's look at a different current events thing and see if we can get you to comment on that. Yesterday, there was a conference of European leaders to deal with the Euro crisis, or the European debt zone crisis, and I ran the BBC several times to see what they had to say on it, and over again, the reporters were talking about leadership and the crisis of leadership, and the leaders have to do this, and you've got a PhD in economics and you've got a PhD in management. You're a leadership scholar. Is this a crisis of economics or a crisis of leadership, or both?
Philip, you know the answer already. It's a crisis of leadership, you know that.
But the recorder doesn't.
It's a crisis of leadership. Part of the problem has been is you need to make clear to the naive public who has been fed on scandal stories by popular journals like Der Spiegel and things like that, with great examples, that the European idea is worth it. And you have a number, for example, you have a number of leaders. It's not Greece which is the problem, it's really a country like Italy. And you have Berlusconi there as our hero, which you remember the Economist front page, the man who screwed the whole country, which I love this. I wonder what happened when he opened the Economist and looked at himself there. The man, and so why, of course, you get the leader you deserve. And he is the ideal role model for the Italians, you can say facetiously, because he cheats on taxes. Every Italian does that, and he cheats on his wife. Every Italian does that too. So here he is, our role model. Now you don't know the alternative, but he has been certainly. It's very worrisome to have him as a leader. But it really says something about Italian politics, where you have the whole, a little bit also like sometimes in other countries about a political class who does nothing else. Have never done anything else than being a political animal. Now there's a crisis, but I think also about the mechanics. When you have 27 countries and you have to build a consensus, it's tough. It's tough with all their particular parochial interest. You had the Poles for a while who had the special peeves, and you have all this, how to combine it. So I'm not saying this is an easy job. On the other hand, there are a number of big countries who have a big mouth, and that's of course, and the biggest one is Germany. And Germany, the Bundeschancellor should have made very clear how much Germany profits from the European zone. How much they may have a surplus and things like that, but it's thanks to if they would have a free floating currency, they would never have the surplus. So she has not done enough storytelling, and because of all that, the whole thing has been costing more and more and more, because it basically is a mass psychosis what's going on there. The famous, and of course Germany has been traumatized, and you as an historian know that. I hear stories from my grandfather that the moment he got some money, he would spend it immediately because it was already worth less than the same day. It's hyperinflation. Yeah, and that is still hanging around there. Now, of course, in Greece, you have another tradition. The Greeks were basically terrorized by the Turks, and you certainly didn't pay any taxes to the Turks. So there's a tradition of no taxes. No taxes. You don't pay taxes to the government. And all those things have to change.
So do countries have inner theaters as much as people do?
Yeah, I mean, also,
is that kind of what's happening here? Is that?
Yeah, certainly that's very good observation. It's also as a man in, I think he is in Virginia. It's a psychoanalyst professor. Vulcan is his name. Vulcan. Yeah, Vulcan. And he talks about the chosen trauma, which is like, you have the Kosovo and things like that. And I lived in Quebec. And you have the license plate. You look at the license plate. Je me souviens. I remember the Battle of Abraham. How long was that ago?
Yes.
A few years ago. And when I was there, it was the middle of the language battle. All this, and it was so ridiculous because coming from Europe and speaking 4.5 language, I mean, this province could be the best province of all because they would be bilingual. They could, whatever. Instead, they got in the crazy situation that the only one who spoke 2 languages were the British, because the French never learned English anymore. That's what I mean. In a continent where English, is important, and in a world where English is important, it's that irony. While their parents, of course, went to Harvard, the politicians.
Well, it's the Anglophones who are bilingual.
Yeah, it's ironic, and those kind of lack of visions, and that's the reason when I ask people who is the greatest living leader you can think of, who would they pick?
Who would you pick?
I'll pick the same one. It's Mandela.
Because of?
Mandela, because he could forgive. He could forgive. But why do people admire him? You have a Mandela and a Mugabe. I've been many times in Zimbabwe. And I look at the horror what has happened there. It was such a great country and it be totally destroyed by this person. Power corrupts power, absolute power corrupts. Then look at Mandela. Now, he made mistakes. I mean, he's not, he is certainly very much for loyalty, so he's kept on protecting Mugabe, for example, and he even has some nice word to say about Gaddafi, because they supported him during the apartheid struggle. But he was able, and it was probably the group therapy sessions on Robben Island, to say, listen, what country do we want to have in the future? And that's something America can learn from that, when you think about the Democrats and the Republicans, why are you screwing up the country?
But the key is division.
The key is division, yeah. And so what here is to go beyond spite and vindictiveness. That to have the greatness of mind. Sometimes show a picture of a number of leaders, and you have there, not Alexander the Great. You have there people like Akbar the Great, Ashoka the Great. You have Marcus Aurelius. You have Solon. And what typified those people? They were inclusive. They went beyond religious boundaries. They were inclusive, and I think and I think Merkel has very good qualities. I mean, she is, but she wanted to be re-elected, and she probably didn't have the hand of cards to make it possible. It needed time to prepare the public for where they are now. I think the public is getting ready there because they see how costly it is to just sit there and. And now you can ask yourself, which is from a political point of view, can Greece ever make it? As part, can Greece go through the structural reforms that are needed? That people change their mindset from the Turks and pay taxes and things like that. It takes time. The elephant is lazy. And talk about the national character, the elephant is even lazier probably than the personal character.
I'm going to do something that a historian normally would do, but that I didn't start out doing. I'm going to ask you a few questions, sort of chronological order.
Sure.
And I'm going to ask you the question that I didn't ask at the beginning, is when and where were you born?
I was born in the small village of Huizen, at home, during the war in 1942. I was a latecomer because mother still complained that I hang in there longer than was needed. I was a big baby, apparently. So that's, I already told you about the village, which was one of those old villages with its native customs.
You graduated from high school, which gymnasium?
I went to a rotten village school.
Okay.
Then I had a teacher who thought that I was maybe a little bit brighter than other village kids, so I said to my parents that maybe not such a bad idea to send them to a high school. In those days you had all categories. So the lowest form of high school, which gives right to university, was the HBSA, it was called. That means Hogere Burgerschool. So Higher Citizen School, literally translated. And so you have A and B. A is more humanities, B is the sciences. But the real highest one would be gymnasium, alpha and beta, but that was too far removed from my parents' imagination, so I never went there. In gymnasium, the business was that in gymnasium you also had to learn Latin and Greek.
So you went to just a...
So I went to from a village school I went to a very simple high school, but it gave the right, but I moved halfway from the A to the B, which was a better one, from the sciences. So I went from A to B after 3 years, and then I graduated. It's a very mediocre school, basically, and then I went, but it gives you the right to certain university studies at that time. Now they in Holland have a very funny system also of lotteries.
Now, between high school and university, did you go to Harvard?
I went to Harvard summer school, which was...
And how in the world did a boy from...
Because my father was, in Dutch standards, not too bad off, and he had an office in Boston.
Oh.
And so he had friends in Boston. He came there all the time. He had a sales office in Boston, so Harvard is in Boston. So somebody said, and one of his friends, their son went to Harvard. And so he said, maybe you should go to Harvard summer school. So I went there.
And so what did you study?
I did some statistics and some international business courses, international economics courses.
What did that experience mean to you?
The courses were totally, I forgot all about that. But it was more the social...
It's all right, my students do that too.
It was more the social environment. I remember meeting a crazy guy from Ethiopia who actually became a professor there for a while. He's down in Princeton. And people like that was a different group. I met lots of women. I mean, that's was a very interesting place for meeting women. They had mixers and things like that. So it was interesting.
So it's very different than
very different.
What you were used to.
I was basically, as a high school student, I did play outside, but I was very focused in studying because I was not brilliant. I'm persistent, not brilliant. So I basically. There are many more people who have much better brain than I have, but I'm very persistent. So that I had to persistence would pay off. Yeah, I'm serious about that.
That seems like a bit of modesty, but one of your
that's
qualities. So I mean, you're astonishingly persistent.
I'm very persistent. I mean, I hang in there, and that because I was on a mathematical oriented school. I'm not good in mathematics. The only course I actually failed in university was statistics. I do it over. And now I developed this crazy. I did 5 tests, which is psychometrics. I mean, can't believe it, me. Of course, I delegated certain things. I hired the best psychometrician in France to help me. And so it was a very fruitful collaboration. You can know everything. I mean, but that's still not my. That's never been my greatest element.
So then you went back to the Netherlands and you enrolled?
Yeah, that was actually stupid. I probably could have entered Harvard at the time, but I decided I first do a degree in Holland and then I go back to Harvard. That was my plan.
And you studied economics?
7 years of economics.
And ended up with a doctoral degree?
No, what you get in Holland is you do a doctoral examination, and then you get the title DRS. If you write a dissertation, you cut the S off.
So you are the DRS.
I'm the DRS. I'm economic. I also have the right to. I almost became an accountant on top of it. I mean, I can teach accountancy. Can you believe it? I'm totally hopeless.
So,
accountancy.
But what attracted you to economics?
It's a negative choice. I went. My father wanted me to become a chemical engineer,
okay.
And I went to Delft. I go to the laboratory, and a person brings me there. He said, on the average, people stand here 7.8 years. I was 17 years old. That's more than half my life. I looked and walked straight out. The director of the laboratory said he wanted to meet me because he never had people to walk in and walk out. So he said, oh my God, what am I going to tell my father? Maybe mechanical engineering, that's shorter. That also was not a success. So then finally I decided, okay, negative choice, economics. You have options. Options. I was not made for a chemical engineer, I think. I was good in chemistry. I was very good in chemistry, but not...
So what do you think that 7 years of studying economics has meant to your career trajectory?
Oh, it's very simple. The way I was studying I was doing these studies at the University of Amsterdam, and the way that the studies were designed was basically you had a certain periodic exams. And you pass the exam, you go one step further and one step further. It was a funnel system, the very stupid system. If you funnel, you get as many people in, and then you slowly kill them off. That's what you do. And I was pretty good in, so I learned there. I went to the lecture hall, like you have now in France, Sorbonne. It's large lecture, and somebody was reading out certain things or whatever. It was totally boring, totally useless. So I said, I don't have to sit. I can read a book. So I crammed for exam, but I spent all my time in cafes. So I learned human behavior by see how I could. Women was also one of the interests, that was actually a very good study in human behavior. I started my interest in psychology, practical.
Did you know it at the time, or you were just watching people walk by on the sidewalk?
I had some interest in psychology, but I hadn't read that much. I read some books, some philosophy, but I did pretty well as far as I knew that everything would be okay as long as I passed the exams. I would be in no problems with with my father. My father was the one who financed the studies. But I realized in hindsight that there was a cafe in Amsterdam, it's a hotel also, Hotel American hotel. And I had a very big coffee place, also a reading table. And so the challenge was there to meet women there. That was the challenge. But what was it? You had to really make. It was a big room, so many people could see what you were doing. So how to talk to them without them pushing you away? It was a public. The rejection. So I became very good in that.
Very practical.
Yeah, very, very good, very good. So that was. But what I realized I learned quite a bit about human relations. At the time, indirectly, so through this kind of interaction. And then as I told you, when I went to Harvard, after I did my exam, you have this temporary high. You do your doctoral exam, and then you wake up the next morning and said, what next?
What next, yes.
Yeah.
Well, we started to talk at the beginning of our discussion when you were at Harvard this time, along with your master's and your doctoral studies. There was Abraham Zalesnik, Erik Erikson, Daniel Levinson, and you become acquainted with these scholars.
No, only Erikson and Zalesnik, not Daniel Levinson.
He was not there.
Harry Levinson.
Harry, yes.
Daniel Levinson was at Yale.
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
The seasons of man's life and women's life.
So how on earth did you go from business management to these gentlemen? I mean, how did you meet them? How did you end up talking to them and ultimately working with them?
No, Zalesnik was simple. It was by, listening to the career of Ed Schein, me and my career when he was talking there about serendipity. It was an advisor for the International Teachers Program, and I took the traditional courses, which you take business policy, international business, all those kind of things. But then there was this funny course, and I was always interested in Freud. And so psychoanalytic psychologist said, why don't you take that? So I took that, and I fell in love with that kind of area.
And that was Zalesnik's course? That was
Zalesnik's course. And I became his assistant, and I worked for him. I spent quite some years with him. Not always the easiest person. And it was very sad, I felt, when I invited him the last time for the CCC program. I realized that he was no longer really there. He was losing it. And then when I saw him a few days ago, it was he thought he was in Florida. He had a house and an apartment in Florida, so it was so it makes you sad. Said, who's next? The next generation. That kind of. But also, that was then Erikson. I came in contact with through Sudhir. I mentioned Sudhir Kakar, who was this person I do the CEO seminar with, and he Erikson at the time was writing a book on Gandhi's Truth, which got the National Book Award, I believe, at the time. And Sudhir was there. He was at that time a professor at Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad, and Ahmedabad was a dry state. I think they drank together. Sudhir was actually an engineer, became a teaching fellow, and so Sudhir I met by accident in Zalesnik's seminar, and so we started to talk, and so that's the reason I got introduced to Erikson. Levinson I had very little contact with, and had to do with subgroups at the Harvard Business School. Levinson was in the OB department, Erikson was his own department, one-man show. One-man show is also stupid. Called the social psychology of management, which is such a misnomer, you can't believe it.
I'm going to ask you a question for the benefit of the transcriber. You said the dry state?
Yeah.
And the name of it?
Gujarat. Gujarat is an Indian state, which were Gandhi state, and
Okay.
and there was also the Salt March, I believe, at the time. So Ericsson was doing research on Gandhi there, and he stayed in the house of a very prominent family. It's the Sarabhai family, which later I start to know also a little bit. So when you read that book, you see the prominence of this family. It's very dominant. It was at that time the Magnus of textile. Actually, the daughter is a famous dancer.
I was actually trying to imagine the transcriber trying to Google the name of that state, so I thought I could.
Gujarat. Ahmedabad that's where it was.
I looked up Selesnik just to get a little bit of an idea of his background, and some things stood out after I had read some of your work. I noticed that he served on several corporate boards, that he did consulting work.
He was the chairman of the King's Ranch. Can you believe it?
Is that right?
Yeah.
He wrote an article called "Managers and Leaders: Are They Different?" that won an award.
Yeah.
Did his career have any impact on yours?
Oh, sure. I mean,
It sounds a little bit like the direction you were headed.
Yeah. No, sure. Selesnik was. I think he went to the Navy, and he got decommissioned, and they had this kind of scholarship at the time. So he went to the Harvard Business School, became a research assistant, then he went into a field of operation and production management, which was I guess time and motion study interest. And then later on there was I think a call by the Boston Psychoanalytic Society as an institute to offer some fellowships, and the one who got it was Bales, Fried Bales. Maybe you remember him he is the famous man at the time at Harvard of group behavior, task groups. I mean, there's one-way mirrors, Fried Bales. Okay. Then you had a man called Tajuri, who was a professor at the Harvard Business School, and Selesnik. But Selesnik was the only one who went to his bitter end. And because again, as a non-psychiatrist, medical doctor, you couldn't practice. But he started to practice, he got dispensation, so he was very proud of that. Of course, the irony became that the American Psychological Association, the American Psychoanalytic Association sued each other, and I was an international one. I'm a member of two of them, so they, because of this stupidity, what was going on there, this kind of exclusive medical profession, because it's not a really exclusive medical profession. Well, the rest of the world have lots of non-medical people in the psychoanalytic profession. Anyhow, so he wrote then a book. He wrote a number of books, but one book was called Human Dilemmas of Leadership, where he started to apply some of this clinical concept in a more readable way. But then he wrote his book Power in the Corporate Mind with me, and then I think he got interested in golf. He became a member of the golf club in Belmont, and I think he spent so much time there, and of course also consulting.
Yeah.
And so there was very little. He was a full professor, and so he wrote another book one more, but he didn't do much anymore.
You co-authored, as you said, 1975, of Power in the Corporate Mind with Adam Selesnik. This was your first book-length project?
Yeah. The next book was Organizational Paradoxes.
What was this collaboration with him all about?
He wanted to, the thing is, I should have logically stayed at Harvard Business School. But, he got, a whole history of management. He had Ruttelsberger. Ruttelsberger, you remember him? He was one of the fathers of organizational behavior. Mm-hmm. He was at the Harvard Business School, and he had two assistants, which was Paul Lawrence, maybe Lawrence and Lors, Paul Lawrence, and you had Selesnik. And once I stopped Ruttelsberger when he was an old man, like me, on the bridge of the Harvard Bridge there, the Charles River, and I asked him, what happened? Because they hated each other's guts. Because I was, the thing is, the irony was that Paul Lawrence, when I was in the ITP program, they had sponsors because she was supposed to be a teacher.
Right.
And Paul Lawrence was my sponsor because his wife came from Michigan, I guess, Holland, Michigan, or something like that was their fantasy. So
I know where Holland, Michigan is.
I've been there too. So I had quite a few dinners at their place. And then in Selesnik, he started to foam at the mouth when the word Paul Lawrence was mentioned. So and Ruttelsberger said, two boys fighting for the favor of Papa, very simplistic, very simplistic interpretation. I was a little bit sad, but I knew that I had to stay. I could not go to. I mean, it was ironic. They have a big OB department. I couldn't go to OB. I couldn't go to strategy. I could do things in strategy, but not OB. That was high treason. And it's a little bit in the hindsight. It was, so I didn't get the appointment, of course, because OB took care of that. I was Zeleznik's son, quote unquote,
Right.
metaphoric son.
So why did you do the collaboration with Zeleznik? What was the?
No,
what
he
were you
said,
trying to accomplish?
No, he was trying, can help you doing the book together or things
Okay.
like that from a career. But it was, I've done that with many of my students now
Right.
too. So it's a very help. Now he got a contract for the book contract and things like that. So it was, so it made some sense. And he had written a few articles for the Harvard Business Review, and so he asked me to rewrite some of those articles. It's difficult, and I wrote some other things too. So it's not an easy book to read, I think. And then I did a book called Organizational Paradoxes, which was also my first book alone. It was difficult. It was difficult to write. My wife made comment about it. I lived then in Montreal. And then I started to do some books of readings because I wanted to focus the interface between psychoanalysis and management, so the irrational executive, organization on the couch. And then slowly I started to become faster and faster. That's
with practice.
Yeah, it's practice and practice.
You were at INSEAD, 1971 to 73, and
then I got fired.
yes, and I want to do two things. I want to ask you about that, and then I think maybe we ought to take a break because we've been talking for 2 hours.
I see.
So what happened?
INSEAD was a young institution. I think it was a European idea at the time. It was stimulated by American general is French, General Doriot, whatever the history of it. And in 1970 they appointed the first dean, Dean Barry. Before that, the school was really run by a clique of 4 people. I got an appointment. From the first appointment was 2 years. I got the appointment, and I was complaining I was a good complainer about things were not as they should be.
An assistant professor complaining.
And not realizing the political system there. And they ran out of money somehow, and I was a complainer anyhow, so they said good riddance. They fired 3 people at the time, all for the wrong reasons. One didn't want to grade the exams of a more senior professor, other one, I don't know what, it was the wrong reasons. So I remember I made 2 contributions to INSEAD, and 3 contributions to INSEAD. The first one was, thanks to me, there's a faculty evaluation committee. Because after I got fired, I sent not an email, I put a form in everybody's mailbox saying, today me, tomorrow you, the way it's going. There's a little cabal of old men who seems to have all the power, but there's no process about it. Because I was writing a little bit, and I had pretty decent ratings as a teacher, so there was no real good reason. I remember Dean Barry, he was so embarrassed doing it, that I only realized I was fired when I walked out of the door. It was this kind of too much, it was like the sandwich approach, too much good news, so packaged it well. Later on, first his wife apologized. They offered me a job the next year, by the way, to come back. First his wife apologized, I remember, and then he apologized. He's dead now, so he was, met him. He got set up. He could basically set up. He was he was an American who didn't know all this politicking going on by the old wise men, not wise men. So I left, and it was good for me because.
Why was it? That's really the question I want to get at.
No,
what did you learn from that? Why was it good for you?
Well, it's good for me because it gave me the opportunity. I was already starting psychoanalysis in Paris, but it was very hard because I lived in Fontainebleau and had to go to Paris, and you do 4 or 5 times a week. You lose every time. Back in the commute, half a day. It was really not sustainable. So as a result, I hoped to get an appointment at Harvard. I didn't get that. Because of the Zeleznik mantra, they don't want any more. Of course, you can do anything to him because he's a full chair professor, but at least you don't want another one hanging around there. And I had built no alliances with the OB department, so no way I would get an appointment. And he didn't. I think he didn't make so much of an effort either. I can see in hindsight. So Henry Mintzberg got me. My time in Montreal was very good.
How did you know Mintzberg?
I didn't know him. I didn't know him. He basically knew I was in the market, and he gave me a call.
Now you said that when you were let go at INSEAD, you were doing psychoanalysis in Paris.
I was starting my psychoanalysis in Paris.
So you had already begun training there.
Yeah, not training. It was
you were in psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was not training, and so then I went to Montreal, and my big disappointment was I interviewed there. I was actually accepted that year by the Boston Psychoanalytic Institute, but I had no job. So I went into Montreal. I lived still in Cambridge. I interviewed, and then they told me later that I couldn't be accepted as a candidate, apart from being a crazy candidate, because usually a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist, that because I was not in psychoanalysis in Montreal, it's very difficult. I didn't live in Montreal. So I felt it was a very silly argument. And I remember I had interviewed 3 people, and I was quite angry about it. That don't be so this bullshit. So I went to Maurice Tongier, who was then the head of psychiatry and the head of the ILA. I remember he had at that time an enormous office. I mean, it was a gigantic office. And he was a mensch, to use that term. He was a real human being. And then he sent me a year later.
It's a Hebrew term for a decent guy.
A real decent guy. And he sent me 2 years later, or a year and a half later, sent me an email, sent me notes. Said, listen, we started a new class. Would you be interested? Nice of him. So, I'm not a good politician, but I had one other person I had interviewed said, I'm very happy to take you as a patient. And I didn't want it, but I asked him if he would be willing to take me, which was, by the way, from a political point of view, I realized much later, a fantastic move, because I didn't get any hassles, because if you're the head of psychiatry, and you're the head of the ILA, and you're the patient of this person, everybody else leaves you alone.
And he was the head of what now?
He was the head of psychiatry of McGill.
Yeah.
And the head of the ILA Memorial Institute, which is the biggest, I think, the psychiatric think tank in Canada.
And so you basically took the tenure track job at McGill.
Yes.
So that you could be up there to take the psychoanalytic course.
And it was a very good choice because it was not so dogmatic. It was very like the Boston Psychoanalytic is very classical. This was quite, lots of different influences, much more flexible.
We can get this thing going again. All right, that one's on. And they're both on. So just for the benefit of anybody who's listening to this recording or reading the transcript, this is a second session with Manfred, Kets, Vries, and where we finished up before we took a break, we were basically talking about your accepting an appointment at McGill University, and so that I can get all of this in one place. You accepted a position at McGill University, Montreal, Quebec, Canada, on Faculty of Management, advanced through the academic ranks, earning tenure in 1979, full professor in 1980. And while you were earning tenure and full professor at McGill, you also took psychoanalytic training from 1977 to 1982, and then earned membership in the Canadian Psychoanalytic Institute in 1982. You then engaged in private practice as a psychoanalyst. So I guess the obvious question is, for most people, earning tenure and promotion in a discipline is a job in itself, and at the same time you were taking training in psychoanalysis. So
I was doing consulting to pay for it all.
so how were you able to do all of that?
It was very difficult, to be very honest. My wife makes some jokes about it, but dinners were said, you can have dinner at 6:20, between 6:20 and 6:40 and things like that. It was quite, because I was teaching, I was taking seminars at the Psychoanalytic Institute, and I had 3 patients plus 3 supervisions. So I had also, on Saturday and Sunday, sometimes I got totally nuts, because I have no freedom, because I don't like that, and I would take a day off. I would basically say cancel everything and go fishing. Which is not so difficult when you live in Quebec. So that was my way of getting. I also would go to New York State. I had a big fish there in the river, the Pulaski area, something like that. They came up in the Great Lakes. I would do, but it was difficult. Also, I had to do some consulting because of I had to pay for my the salaries, as you know, professor, when it's very high. I had to pay for the children, went to private schools after we gave up on the public schools. They were also on strike at the time. And so it was quite, and then I didn't write that much because I had not the time for it. It was actually interesting. The moment I finished my training, I got accepted as a member. I wrote a book in a month with Danny Miller, the Neurotic Organization. That was, and at the time we had no email. It was kind of a funny way we wrote, because Danny is a night owl. He lives at night and I live in the day. So I would pick up early in the morning under his, the mat, the doormat would be what he has written. I continue, and I would give it back to him, and he would continue. So it was a 24-hour process of writing this book.
I heard that you actually wrote the book in a month,
Yeah.
and he did it at night. You did, and I was going to ask you if that could possibly be true, but I guess it was.
It was true.
And you wrote the whole book in a month.
In a month, yeah. It was actually first of all I was going to write an article. I mean, he was my student. And Henry Mintzberg student, the best students, like probably, was very smart, but he never taught really. He didn't like teaching, and he managed to get away with it by being a research professor. And I think he would be a good teacher, by the way, but we all have our own demons. So he was interested in structure, Henry's structuring, and I was interested in personality. So we started to talk. He was also my house sitter when I went to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So we started to talk, and he really is very imaginative. So we got to this paper, Personality, Leadership and Organization, something like that, I don't know the exact title. And then we did another paper, so we realized if we continue like this, we have a book. And so we did very fast. And we had, I think once a week we had a meeting face to face. We talked about things. It was, he's a kind of an interesting character, Danny, quite unusual.
Besides working all night, what made him an interesting character?
I think his night owl, I have to get used to his, I think he got married finally, which was a miracle, I think, and he got more socialized. Then he managed to get 2 professorships, one at HEC, which I helped him at the time with, the business school in Montreal, and then one in Alberta. I think he's part-time in University of Alberta. So he has, he also had this sense of that he had MS, but he seems to be fine. So it was a very good excuse that he didn't have to teach or whatever, didn't travel. But he is an interesting, but very talented. You give him some data, and he makes something out of it. That respect has like also my ex-doctoral student who is now in Berlin, Kostya, who was a very positive. He kept pesting me last week about let's do another book together. And I said, listen, I need some time to think. I mean, at one book, I'm so happy. I don't have any. I mean, everything is ready to go now. Like 2 books come out next month or so, and one book is still in the process. But I don't have this pressure of 3 books hanging over me. And schizophrenic behavior. You get lots of invitation to write chapters in book, which I find actually quite useless, because they don't add very much. I get bored.
I noticed though that you co-authored with quite a number of your colleagues and students.
Yeah, I've done this whole series on coaching, the 3 volumes. The last one I didn't want to do. And Kostya kept on pesting me, so I said, you're going to be the first author, I want to be the first author. And so because I wanted, it was like I was on a train. For the last 6 years, too many books. And it's not just the book writing, that's fine, but then you get the proofs and all those other things, all the hassles and the queries. And after I've finished something I've written, I'm so fed up with it. I don't want to see it ever again. That's basically what I can see it. Every sentence I've written 30 times, so I don't want to see it ever again. I mean, I marvel. I was having dinner last night with an old student friend of mine from Harvard, who was. He said he dictates everything. He's not a writer. He's a businessman.
Mm-hmm.
But he dictates everything. Comes out very well. But that's not me. I my 2 fingers. I plonk along.
That's really amazing that you. While you were at McGill, when did you begin to see psychoanalysis fitting together with your previous training in management and economics? I mean, how did you put those pieces together?
It's actually interesting. My wife tells me that initially I said, this is going to be the area I'm interested in is so small, never going to be anything. And it has really, I think I contributed a little bit to it. It has really grown quite exponentially. So, but I started to see that when I was in the training, psychedelic training, because I met this question of creativity takes place in the interface of different worlds. I don't know if you have the same experience as an historian. And I was in the world of clinical psychologist, psychiatrist on one hand, that was the world of business. Unfortunately, McGill was not very pragmatic. I mean, the business school, at least, as far as the real, like for example, now at the school where, I mean, our business model is very much driven by the business community,
right.
not just MBAs and that kind of MBA's production line. And so, but I started to, and that's the reason the book was written so quickly. Neurotic, in a neurotic organization, which had quite an impact, even though, I mean, I gave so many lectures on it at the time. I get bored with, and would I write a similar book now? Probably somewhat different. But that was, and so I became the, probably the most foremost person on the darker side of leadership. That also, now you see more, snakes in suits and all those kinds of books. It's Robert Hare, the man of the psychopath test, as well as a book on psychopath. So I haven't done much because 10 years ago I made a change again when I became the director of the Global Leadership Center at INSEAD, in which I said, okay, and it was a very good timing, serendipity, and I didn't plan it, serendipity. I had a consulting and coaching program for a year, which became an assessment center, so I could really see who are the best and I can pick out and use for my center. Coaching was becoming quite popular, and so everything came together. So it was certainly not sophisticated planning, the trends of the market. It was all those things coming together, and also the clinical approach, the group coaching idea, which I've been doing for quite a few years, but it didn't work that well because they wanted high touch, and it was expensive because there was only one person there, me. So then I decided that maybe you cannot afford it for the MBA students, but you can afford it for the business community. And they're willing to pay for it. And so it was, and then I had another problem, how to get leadership coaching into the executive programs. And of course, when you bring something in, something has to go out. And people don't like to have things that go out. So it really was the marketplace who said, listen, here was the most important advanced management program. This is the most important experience we had, those days of coaching. That was really, people are more finance or economics or whatever. They want to think about their lives when they're there. And that was an opportunity to do that. So then I had to defend our position against the Center for Creative Leadership. So that's the reason I got into psychometrics. So I developed these 5 tests, which cost me every test cost me a summer. A real pain in the neck. I mean, there's manuals, facilitator guide, participant guide. Such boredom. This is really, this is the lowest denominator for the general idiot. And then you have to get it on the web, which And again, when you don't have a very supportive dean or getting some IT support, this is all it was difficult.
And the reason for developing and integrating the psychometrics was?
I needed to get, since in the executive education group, which is 60% of our business model income, coaching could not be many days because of the cost. Because every coach cost me so much money. I had to jumpstart the process, and the best way to jumpstart it is when the coaches get some biodata information and get some 360 data. And so
what is C60 data?
360 are the feedback from people at work and people at home.
Okay.
And friends, whatever they want, feel they can make some sense of. Like you were asking some people about me.
Okay.
And so that's 360 data. So to jumpstart the process.
Okay.
And so that works. And my problem is that some of the things I did, like how to create a more transitional space, like having people do a self-portrait and things like that, becomes institutionalized. I think remarkable how things become a gospel. For just a little icebreaker, it's now a total gospel. People do all that. My coaches do all different hocus pocus around it.
So is that good or bad?
I'm always worried about gospels. I want people to be their own people in many ways, but it does work.
So what's wrong with the gospel? What scares you about a gospel?
That it cannot adapt to changing circumstances. Maybe the world changes, and that may not be the right way to go about it. So we become like psychoanalysis, be so dogmatic about how many sessions and that kind of thing, and the kind of the unwritten wall that you can project your fantasies to support the transference neurosis. I mean, come on. I mean, you don't get away with it anymore. People want empathy on some reactions. A few grants are not good enough.
So on the one hand, you have developed practices and activities that other people have embraced, but on the other hand, you're concerned that they embrace them too tightly and that creativity gets cut off.
It couldn't be said better. Exactly. That always worries me. And also, I mean, after a while, I've used it a number of times. I get bored. Saying what other, and like now, I'm a little bit searching. What can I do? You know, you have basically so much time left. You know, it's the old Jesuit approach about, you know, what have I done today which is meaningful. So do I want to do a book again with someone else? And many people ask me to do a book together. I'm not so sure about it. Also, I write faster alone, I've discovered.
I bet you do.
Edited books actually a pain in the neck, because many of the people cannot write, so you have to restructure things and whatever. Liz Florent has been very good in that. She's more patient than I have. But you have to, sometimes you get very lazy people. People make promises about doing things, don't do it. I mean,
you said Liz was it?
Liz has been my research director.
Yeah.
She started as a typist.
She told me that. Bilingual typist.
Yeah, she was. She started from California. Started as a typist in the typing pool. Talk about job enrichment. She will. I see her as a professor in a few years.
So I'm interested in something you said a minute ago about not wanting to be bored. Is one of the things that has driven your career a desire not to be bored?
And boredom is, of course, it's an interesting topic. I even try to write about it a little bit, although I don't think I make major breakthroughs about that. To write about boredom. But boredom is actually has to do with depression and anxiety. That's what it really is. So if you do the same thing, now if you have one good idea in your life, you're lucky. That's basically it. And I see myself as a translator, really, of sometimes complex concept to make it palatable to another audience. That's the way I really see it. So the old statement, which is overdone, maybe standing on the shoulder of a giant, is very true. I mean, what is new after Plato? I mean, and the older I get, the more I see this recycling. I'm just seeing some young people talking about the great leadership statements of someone, and I say, there are a lot of other people already wrote about it, called it different names. So what is new? What is new? But of course we all want to have our footprint somewhere, and we do it by reframing things. So the boredom, it's actually I think the closest way to describe boredom is really it's a depressive reaction. And of course life is not a rose garden, to use this kind of cliche. I mean, I look at the people getting older. I mean, it's fortunately Gaga. That's probably the best way to go in the end. But
you've worked really hard to keep boredom at arm's length.
Yes, I do.
So what's in your footprint? You talked about your footprint. What do you think your footprint is?
My footprint, I have a fantasy. In the present CEO program, there are probably 200,000 people. They're responsible for maybe 200,000 people. If I can make them a little bit more humane and effective, it may have a kind of cascade effect to the rest of the organization. So it's my small contribution to society. I mean, you must have heard the parable of the sea star, about the storm, thousands of sea stars on the beach. In the morning, a person taking his dog for a walk and see this one person there on the beach throwing one sea star after the other. He comes there and said, "What are you doing? What are you doing? You cannot throw them all back. You cannot make a difference. You make a difference for this one." So this is the way. I mean, and it's very often when I do a workshop, for example, for a company. I read it not too long ago. There were 100 of the top people of this 40,000 people organization, and they were sitting there waiting for Godot, who said, "You have the power. If you want to change things, you can change it. You don't wait for a God or whatever. It's you." And it's this kind of passivity sometimes, to realize that you have to take initiative. And then, you talk about personality types. In a very simplistic way, you can say, two kinds of people. People who give energy and take energy. That's a very simplistic. And people who have some skills and have no skills. So you can make a whole, the 2x2 things about what kind of people you need. And so we make it very often too complex, I find. I was in this interview this morning, and there was obviously a psychologist there who asked me questions about personality types and whatever, and I was trying to, but keep it simple. Keep it simple, because it's psychobabble is all over the place, and also management babble. When you look at the management books, aren't you scared? You put on Amazon.com, leadership, 70,000 books on leadership. I mean, it is scary.
It's a challenging body of work, let's put it that way.
Yeah, but most of it's crap.
So I'm interested in a word you used a minute ago with your training in psychoanalysis and economics and management and consulting. You said you look at yourself as a translator. So
I learned to be a translator when I wrote for the journal. It was a Dutch journal called NSC. Algemeen Handelblad was the elite daily in Holland, and I became a translator. I did a book, Life and Death in the Executive Fast Lane, I think came out of that. I had a plan there, so I'm not just going to I'm going to write and make them longer editorials, so it can be used later for a book, and I did. But it was fun actually to take some concepts and questions people raised, journalists who came and asked questions, and I could answer them thinking about it. And playing with the ideas. It makes me feel alive. I mean, we all need to. When I don't write, I've already said that I don't feel that well. And lately, the only thing I wrote really the last month or so was the speech for my honorary doctorate. So the only thing I did. For the rest, I'm not.
So do you feel like you're having withdrawal?
Yeah, I mean, it's not good for me. I was writing this article about business review, so the day before yesterday, and so it started to become that really. I see how it does to me. And then I started other ideas but I decided to have a moratorium for a short while. I don't want to jump into another project because and I think what of course happens. We all are meaning-searching animals. How can you really have impact? How can you? So that's what I'm looking for at the moment.
I'm going to go back to the word translator, because you really are more than a translator, and one of the ways that we measure scholarship is by what we add to knowledge, its impact, what we add to what we know. What do you think your impact is? What do you think you've added to what people know about leadership?
You're too deep. You know, I have an association. There was a Dutch painter called Karel Appel. I think he's now dead, but his paintings sell for millions. And he once, this kind of cultural art historians would come to him and ask him, what is the meaning of all this blots and things like that? He said, I just mess around a little bit. That's what he was saying. And I always liked that answer. And so. And actually,
but it's a dodge. It's a dodge.
And actually, I'll tell you another story, which is a kind of strange story. There was an exhibition in the Pompidou Museum in Paris about Yves Klein. Yves Klein, if you've never heard of him, but he's famous for his Yves Klein blue. I think his family still lives with it. He died fairly young. And at the exhibition, these paintings cost zillions, a lot of money. And one thing he did, if you go to the web, you type in Yves Klein and video, you see his little videos, he is dressed in tails, there's one tone of music, and he uses naked ladies who press themselves against the canvas, blue, and millions. So I think it's a joke, that's my feeling. Then I was with my wife to Galerie Markt in the south of France, and there were all black. I thought I can do it too, so I decided to become a painter. And I went to Moscow, Red, time for Red. So there was my students organized a whole orchestra. There were 6 naked ladies from, I think, St. Petersburg probably, with a rehearsal, and then an auction. So I was muddling along. That's what I do in my writing. I muddle along, and but what I've added to be more serious about it, and my wife doesn't like this. She wasn't there. But I have videos made of it.
You notice I didn't follow up on that. I just let you talk.
It was quite. Actually, it was a shambles, and the hoi polloi of Moscow were there. It was actually a big event sponsored by a number of companies. It was quite something. But my wife didn't felt the sense of humor about this whole thing. But I felt sometimes the element of I think you need a sense of playfulness about things. Sometimes people get too serious, and I was listening to the students this morning talking about one of my colleagues' work, who I know quite well, and it becomes also dogma. This thing. That's my fear always. I mean, you need this kind of playing creativity is very closely related. So, and there's also the element of leadership as an art. When I look at this Eric Whittaker of the virtual choir, I felt it was interesting. The man thought out of the box. And so I'm thinking also now, how can I use the internet in, for example, group coaching, and to really make an impact? So I don't have also to travel that much. You'll fly to Australia or whatever other places. But my contribution is really that I have helped people to have an extra lens in looking at organizations. Mm-hmm. That's the way, in a very simplified way, after my whole detour of the art, leadership as an art. And many things is almost like intuition, which is another form of reasoning, which is hard to transmit. I can, if I get your card, I can send you this video I made. It's a big file. I'll send it about illustrating the clinical paradigm, and my video I made, not the video of the painting video, but the video of the intervention of group coaching intervention, which I found that's one of my contributions. I think also how to really help people change, because most people when they write the bio notes, and I read them, said my boss tells me I'm a micromanager, my colleagues tell me I'm a micromanager. They know it for years, but they don't do anything about it because they're stuck. Now, I help people get unstuck. Now you have Bob Keegan at Harvard. He has this system of the immunity system to try to get them out of it. That's one way already clarifying some of the other forces which are there, but it might not be good enough. That's not good enough, because it's the power of the group. When I go to Moscow and deal with one of my clients there, it's an interesting discussion, I enjoy it, but I don't have much impact. But if you would be part of a group, in this case not possible because it's too glorious, you can, and other people push them back, like I did recently in the UK, where you had a very reluctant CEO. Mm-hmm. And Bento brothers, fine, but in the end somebody has to make a decision. You cannot wait for Godot. Godot's no longer there, he's retired. So he's next in line. So to push him, and it takes practice and practice. That's the reason virtuality and the web becomes more important, because what used to be very expensive to fly them in, right, for the follow-ups you cannot do on the web. And that's what I'm trying to play a little bit with.
Have you done any of that yet?
We do it. Personally I don't do much coaching. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's the best. I have a lot of good coaches. It's not the best use of my time. I think I know how I can do it. Like I know to teach the basic course in OB. I know how to do it. I did for 20 years. I know how to do it. But I think I'm in this point in time, I'm more in the people development process to have other people do it, and some people do it much better than I do. Like certain coaching, I have one person who I quote unquote recycled, who is now a fantastic professor at our school. And you give him any bad group, anything, really difficult groups, he bounces up, makes something out of it. That's fantastic.
At this point in your career, do you see one of your major goals is developing other people?
Yeah, that should be also. I'm in the Hindu religion, the forest dweller state, and also the generativity stage of Erickson. So yeah, sure, I've developed lots of people. I've developed large numbers of people. It was actually striking when I got my accident. How many people have you touched? And I discovered, which even though I'm an introvert, I've touched many people. Mm-hmm. All this email, whatever, letters, whatever I got, cards.
What kind of an impact did that have on you when you realized that?
It feels good. Let's be honest about it. No, you feel that you don't realize. It was this. Do you read this little book by this head of KPMG in America, Seeing Daylight or something like that? It's basically the man realized his brain tumor and he's going to die in half a year, and so he says, who have I touched? And he wants to meet the people he has touched. It's a very touching book. You realize about the finality of life, which is very hard to imagine actually. That's one of the most difficult things we have, that we are mortal. And I guess because I'm getting older, and of course people, you start to wonder, sometimes will I see them again? Mm-hmm. So that's more, we spend all our life trying to suppress the idea of dying. And we have, do anything, we have from from religion to creative works to children one way of that's your system in But so we all do all different kinds. I know that also means the electricity is out. So no, it seems to be on.
No, it's the light. I'm going to stand up and see if I can get some lights back on in here. Or there's some at least. Otherwise, we're going to have to stand up and do jumping jacks.
You have to use this button too.
All right. So, for the benefit of anybody that's listening to this, we're walking around the room turning the lights back on. There we go. Okay. In 2003, you gave an interview to Business Strategy Review, which I read. And in the interview, you described your work as taking place in two main areas, management and psychoanalysis. And then you added that you talked about neurotic organizations, which you've already mentioned, that you published with Danny Miller in 1984. And you said that neurotic organizations, when I'm quoting you, was the first time someone tried to show in a systematic way the relationship between personality, leadership, corporate structure, and strategy. And I'm wondering, first of all, for the benefit of people who are not in your field of expertise, which will be most of the people who will listen to this, how neurotic organizations demonstrated in a systematic way the relationship between personality, leadership, corporate structure, and strategy, which I gather is the essence of what you were trying to do in that book.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because somebody later on, which I must say only later on, realized that Henry Mintzberg also sorts in fives, but he thought more, he's not a pathologist, and of course, Henry Mintzberg and I were the thesis advisors of Danny Miller, so it was a very small circle. Now, I mean, I always have been somewhat of a taxonomist. Also, Henry is a taxonomist, I'm also somewhat of a taxonomist, so I've written many articles on personality. I'm quite influenced by the DSM-4, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the Mental Disorders, in which you have the axis 2, which has those personality types. Now, I'm very ambivalent about it because the moment you give a label on people, they're stuck. And I realized that the longer you know people, the lesser, the more difficult it is to put a label on them. You realize they have a lot of elements of everything. But I have been influenced by that, and so I wrote a lot, for example, on narcissism, which you see, of course, quite a bit among leaders. And of course, paranoia, as I've written in a book, I wrote a book once, a psychobiography type book, which is actually 2 books in one, about Shaka Zulu, which it was a despot in Southern Africa who created Southern Africa. Paranoia is the disease of kings. And I see that, of course, also when I talk with some of those business tycoons I meet, that they don't trust anything anymore. They know and don't know that they're surrounded by yes men and yes women. So those are the obvious ones. But you also had some sleepy organizations, like what I was called the depressive types. Like at that point in time when they wrote the book, it was Disney. Because after all Disney died, they were in a stupor and they would say, like, I wonder what's happening after Steve Jobs died. Now, what would Steve have done? What would Walt have done? That was, they were just going circles and circles and circles until his dumb nephew supposedly, broke that circle. And of course, then you had the other thing, Eisner came in and all other things with his own problems. But so I started to have a number of archetypes in a way. That's so basically looking at personality. Looking at structural dimensions, so we put that together. And Danny being very much influenced by Henry Mintzberg. So that's there's a marriage between the two. And it hit a sensitive chord because people realize when power is quite, in general, very centralized, the personality of the dominant coalition might have an effect. And you see that actually is Murdoch and his empire, and how Rupert's influence has such an influence on this organization, which is very different from, for example, another empire here, which is the Daily Mail and Trust Group, where that's not, they haven't found anything. I hope it will not happen. He has been my student, but they had some strict rules, and I think, but the personality of Rupert, I think, was permeating that particular culture. So and it's of course it's a topic which has interested me for a long time: corporate culture, organizational culture, and because that's the reason I think that at the time Ed Schein was asked to write a review on that book, which was for the American Psychological Association. So
that's a neurotic organization.
Yeah, neurotic organization. Yeah, that's actually was kind of a seminal book. Then I've written a number of other books. I now come out with a book called The Hedgehog Effect, which is a takeoff on the parable of Schopenhauer, the two hedgehogs in the winter, which is really a parable for the human condition, and which is also a way of looking at groups. And one difficult part for me has been the cloud, which is really the group as a whole, and how to sense that you have to go from the individual to the group as a whole to create progress in the process what you're trying to do. That is, you have to be very careful, otherwise you might really get egg on your face. But those are some interesting puzzles. And I've had situations where I did an intervention for an executive team and then they got stuck. And am I fast enough? Am I not anxious enough? To really, and then can I frame it well? The difficult thing about in the clinical profession, maybe perhaps I have this feeling, I'm not sure, but that kind of thing. That you don't make it definite, so you have an escape, and the client doesn't feel hit over the head. So those kinds of maneuvers. But some of it is really almost like an artistry when you see a person at work, and you videotape them, see him at work. That's the reason, for example, the videotape on my intervention. And some people get very irritated because I'm originally Dutch, and Dutch are quite direct. So I'm not, and of course, one of the things we have to fight with all the time is how far can you go, and we have little time. So, and you don't know how. So there's all those forces. And what I have been very proud of in the 10 years I was the director, my greatest fear has always been that, a salaryman from Japan gets through the session and suddenly has an insight and goes bananas, and looks at his life and goes bananas and gets psychotic. And my school cannot handle that, the nerds cannot handle that. So with 10,000s of people, people have passed by. We never had anything, knock on wood. So it just really shows something about the talent of the coaches.
When you were, a few minutes ago, when you were talking about neurotic organization, you said it was a sort of seminal book, and I'll drop the sort of, but what in your own words made that book seminal?
I think because nobody had done it. It was something new because this book really brought a person back into the organization, and that's what I've been doing. Because I mean, the world of organizational behavior was dominated by structural rational assumptions.
That was really your contribution, wasn't it? To focus on the individual.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
No, but no, it tied the individual to the organization. Okay. So it's not just the individual. Or you have the psychologists who are busily looking at individual, or you have the OB profession who's busily looking at structures.
And tell us what OB stands for. Yeah. What does OB stands for?
Organizational behavior.
Okay, that's for the benefit of anybody who's listening to this.
Now, organizational can call it organizational systems. But systems already says it's structural, the rational structural tradition. And coming from the economic, we realize now that it's very interesting. When I was a student of economics, the brightest one did econometrics. That was it, not me. And now it's all behavioral economics. That's where the action is. It's kind of interesting how it shifted because people realize that it's a real dismal science.
So what you did was to tie the individual to the structure. Right.
Yes, and try to make some sense out of it. You can do it, but make some sense, and don't make it in total. Even though I have certain archetypes or whatever, don't make it more fluid. Now, there's always the danger the moment you are engaged in taxonomy that it becomes very rigid. That's the reason I'm saying you can do two things with people. You can say this is this kind of character, narcissistic, masochist, self-defeating, schizoid, whatever you might be. Or you can say this person has a number of themes in his life. Of course, if you have enough themes, the thematological approach, it becomes a character again. But themes, I think, are richer. To say that when you look at the Putin, what are the themes that dominate his life, and so to make some predictions about some of the behavior you can expect from him, and so that's and what kind of organization we create. Of course, in this case, it's control and also paranoia. He wanted to work for the KGB already from a very young age. He had this fantasy there about that spies and whatever could make a difference. His grandfather was the cook of Stalin, so you also must have heard some stories about that. You don't know what happened. I mean, it's the family story, it's the myths in the family which are important. Like we talked about earlier, my mother telling the stories about the Nazi period, and my grandfather telling me finally they got what they deserve. That was the righteousness about it when the Nuremberg trials were taking place, and those war criminals. And now, I read a book many years ago which was Into the Darkness of Gita Sereni, and it's about the camp commander of Treblinka. There was really a factory. There was nobody. Everybody who came there died. And basically it was like you're running a brick factory. So many bricks a day. You had a nice house with some flowers and very religious and things like that. And that of course is talk about this statement which overdone the banality of evil. Is there no empathy? Of course you talk now about psychopaths. They have no guilt, no conscience, but still it's scary. And of course we have the Milgram experiments. Like my little experiment of the bathtub on the field with the cold water. Scary. Nobody stand up and say, listen, do I want this? This cannot stand. This cannot stand.
So do you think that people who do evil things are leaders?
I mean, you have dark leaders, and it depends on your moral values. Are you doing it for the good or for the bad? Hitler was you look at his film, Triumph of the Will. You have seen it, of course. He did a magnificent job there in getting people aroused. What a fantastic orator, picking up themes. The theater of Leni Riefenstahl, the Nuremberg parades there. You feel you're into something bigger than yourself. It really gets a pride and passion. He's very good in it.
So is that an important quality of a leader, to persuade people that they're into something bigger than themselves?
I think so, but for what purpose?
Yeah,
that's the catch, and that's the reason Mandela is seen as one of the greatest leaders of this or previous century now, because I said already, he went beyond spite and vindictiveness and revenge. He said, listen, how can we together build a better country? And I think about my time in Quebec. The petty politicians, instead of saying, okay, we were wronged by the British, but now we're going to get even. And the British establishment really discriminated against it. But now we have the political power. And instead, the economic powers went all to the States or went to Ontario, and the West. Thank you very much. Because that's stupidity. So, and it becomes actually, and Montreal became a backwater. That's what it is.
And one could conclude based on what you said that a large part of the reason for that was a failure of leadership.
Exactly, a failure of leadership. But we have a tendency. It's think about it when you take an evolutionary psychology approach of the territorial imperative. So there's a very aggressive part in us. Fortunately, there's also a collaborative part in us. Otherwise, we will be self-destructive. But how to manage that in a careful way is not always easy. And I think the only way is, of course, we all have somewhere is an altruistic motive. We all somewhere are usually get caught by something bigger than ourselves. And if politicians and leaders can speak to that, and even again you come to business organizations, what are we really doing here? Of course, when you make mustard gas or so, it's not exactly the most, or cigarettes. There are some industries which is difficult. I was recently I met a person who was the chairman of British Tobacco. So I looked at him because it's of course because my grandfather every morning coughed his lungs out because of his smoking.
Right.
So suddenly I never touched a cigarette. That was so good. So I looked at him. He used to be the CEO of Heineken. So then he looked at me and said, "Listen, do you want me to be the chairman of British Tobacco, or if you want a mafia figure to be the chairman of British Tobacco?" And actually, it was a point he made that was different. And he probably had heard the comments before, but still, certain industries it's difficult to tell a compelling story, but most industries, even banks, if they do the right job, you can tell a compelling story. They can do, it's a force for the good.
I'm going to introduce a few facts into the record here and then ask you some questions about INSEAD. But in 1982-83, you returned to INSEAD as a visiting professor of organizational behavior. Then you spent a year as a visitor at the Harvard Graduate School of Business, and then you went back to INSEAD and you earned the rank of full professor in 1984.
I came as immediately when I came after the visiting year. I came immediately back as a full professor.
Okay, you were director of the Raoul de Vitry de Aubecourt Chair in Human Resources Management, and then 1987, and then 1992 you were appointed holder of that chair.
It was a little bit of an, had to do with who had the chair, the directorship before.
You mentioned that was the second oldest endowed chair.
Yeah, the first one was the Loudon chair, which was at the time used to be the chairman of Shell, and then that chair is the Raoul de Vitry chair, which was the name of the father of the giver.
So
it was DEC. He got the money from DEC, I think, at the time.
How did it feel to come back to INSEAD as an accomplished scholar when they had let you go a few years earlier?
No, not 2 years earlier.
I said a few.
A few years earlier. I had a lot of friends there. I kept friendships there, so it was in a way easy. There was, of course, some ambivalence. There's always the element of what does it mean for other people in certain areas. I left OB actually after a number of years. I went to entrepreneurship because I felt it was not like at McGill where there was a fairly good group. I felt mutual support. It was at that time it may be different. Now there's a lot of fighting going on, and I felt it didn't bring out the best in everybody. So entrepreneurship was a much more pleasant. I first became faculty at large. I did it at Selesnik. And then I became it's actually faculty at large, which was all, the real reason, the underlying reason was very simple. To be very frank about it, they wanted me to. I had been the chairman of two areas in McGill, strategy and organizational behavior. So I had done a lot of surfing, institutional surfing. I came to INSEAD and they wanted to make me chairman of the area, and I saw a lot of people who were doing a lot of consulting and not very much else. And I said, I'm the one who can really write best of them, and should I spend my time on secretary assignment and office assignment and whatever, and somebody else should do it. So I felt that was not right. And so finally they kept on pushing me there, and so I said, okay, quit. And I became faculty at large. And then the dean at the time asked me, we had a very small entrepreneurship department, to be a little bit of a mentor to the people that were younger, and that has been a very pleasant group. Maybe I should, but of course I belong in OB, which became a problem when the center, the leadership center, grew like crazy, and so the poor OB group felt it should be really in OB, and so my successor, by the way, is in OB.
You have published so much that it's difficult, particularly for somebody not in your field, to categorize this, but I'm going to note here that during the 1980s and 90s, early 90s, mid 90s, you published several books in quick and astonishing succession. And I already mentioned Organizational Paradoxes, which was your second book, and then The Neurotic Organization. And then I'm going to read a few more titles and ask you a question. You edited, I think, The Irrational Executive, Psychoanalytic Explorations in Management, 1984. Unbalanced at the Top, again with Danny Miller, 1987. Prisoners of Leadership, 1989. Organizations on the Couch, 1991. Leaders, Fools, and Imposters in 1993. And before I just kind of throw it open and ask you a broad question, I noted that all these titles you picked are full of descriptors that describe challenges or even dysfunctionalities. We've got neurotic, unbalanced, prisoners, fools, imposters.
You're getting depressed, aren't you?
Well, it almost seems as though, Dr. Kets de Vries, the practicing psychoanalyst, was extending his private practice that treated with people with problems and disorders to organizations or leaders that were troubled or sick. I mean, is there anything to that, or is this the outsider looking in?
No, you're right. I said already before, I was the pathologist of organizations. Mm-hmm. Actually, I made a joke sometimes. When I give a lecture, I say, I used to be the pathologist of organization. I get people depressed, and then I tell them the second part of my lecture, how to become a charismatic transformation leader in one easy lesson. So at one point in time, which was really around 11 years ago, when I was asked by the dean to set up the Leadership Center, the dean at that time, I decided how can you, it was more the American approach, how to make good people even better. So I switched, but still not being a positive psychologist, to keep the other side in mind, because it's there too. There is an element of the darker side. So I went more the other way, and the work at the Leadership Center has been not using this clinical paradigm, understanding that people may have some other sides too, but what can we do to make them more effective? That has really been, and has also been to some extent my main laboratory has been for 20 years, my CEO seminar.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not like, I see all these case studies are at business school, and I've written many case studies, and yet, you get very often the party line. But to have people really talk very frankly, that happens there. That's the reason I've never had anybody in that class. The other class, yes, I do. The consulting and coaching, I let people in. But many journalists, for example, wanted to be in that class, but that will destroy the confidentiality. So, and of course you can say when you have 20 people in a class, how confidential can it be, because people talk, which is true, people talk. The secret is, sometimes the secret can be very hot, they probably talk to their wife, husbands, whatever. But still, I try to create a private, safe space for them as much as possible as I can. And that you really start to learn, I think my book, Sex, Money, Happiness and Death, may be a culmination to that. Some of the themes which are important to them, which go beyond the more banal business themes, how to manage my boss, that's kind of thing, or I have a merger and I don't understand that culture. Not so banal maybe, but it's a more traditional one.
But those are not the issues you generally address.
No, they will be addressed. Anybody, I will address any issues as long as you can personalize it. I don't want abstract discussions. There will be some time, because that is a kiss of death, going to general abstractions. I have a problem. I have a problem, I just merged with a company, and I don't understand the Swedes. I'm a Dane, the Swedes are idiots. I don't understand them. Or I get, I have now this, we have now a global whatever company, and I don't understand how we integrate that. Or I said, listen, I've been an expatriate for all my life, and my wife and children want me to be in one place, and next week I have a meeting with the chairman, and I know he's very overwhelming. He's going to ask me to go to Thailand and to run the Asian group, and how can I deal with that? Those are, and then you can of course talk about cross-cultural difference, but it has to be, you have to feel it in your stomach. Otherwise it's not real, because when you change people, it is not just the head, which of course most education takes place, but it's also the stomach. So the emotional part, because affect and cognition, they have to be combined to have any effect. Otherwise it doesn't work.
So the stomach is the irrational part?
No, it's more the affective part,
okay.
the more emotive part. That's what I'm referring to. So, and that's the reason in a seminar like that, lectures are not good, because people get from the passive dependencies. Tell me I remember, tell me I forget, involve me I remember, which was Confucius. You have to get them involved.
So is that really the key to your seminar strategy, is to not allow people to become passive?
Yeah, of course, you can have 100% concentration,
right,
but I don't. I'm very quick in picking up canaries. Even in large audiences, I see a person says something slowly fading away. What is your name? John, you're going to be my canary. John thought he was safe in the back row. Now he's not safe anymore. Are you still awake, John? 500 people in the audience. It certainly keeps people, everybody's alive. I learned it actually from a colleague of mine, was Jeff Sonnenfeld, who did a CEO seminar in Atlanta when he was in Emory. And I found it was fascinating to keep all those executives on their toes for 2 days or so, but he had this on his homework. So I was dozing away, just coming from Europe in Atlanta. I said, Manfred, you are as a cross-cultural person. I was not asleep anymore. That's very simple tricks about teaching, but you have to. Why waste your time? Sit there. Actually, many of the big plenary meetings here are like that.
Right.
The average attention span of my students is 20 minutes. So you have to do something to keep their attention span.
When I talked to your colleague, Eric Vanderloo, he generally talked to me about psychotherapy and I know I'm gonna do some violence to this, but I want to see if I can get you to respond to what he said. He said there are basically two traditions: an individual tradition and a group tradition. He talked about the individual tradition being Freudian, where you start with the individual, and he said that Abraham Zelesnik was, definitely in that group, and you. And then he just talked about the other group tradition, and he talked about one of your colleagues, Anton Oberholzer.
Anton Oberholzer, he's the head of the chairman of the Tavistock.
And he said that you began squarely in what he would call the Freudian camp, and that over time you sort of incorporated what he called more levels of reality into your work, including a group level or an organizational level. So the question that I'm asking here is a growing willingness on your part to embrace a group tradition a fair characteristic of part of your scholarly development?
Fair enough. I'm trying to think about it. I think I had the individual tradition and the organizational tradition, but the group was somewhat missing. And I went into more group processes later on in a way. But of course it's ridiculous that I didn't do it immediately, because you go from the individual to the diet to the group, small group, and then big group organization, and maybe civil society, so a different step to take. But I was more focused on the individual and the organization, which is probably represented to some extent also in the neurotic organization, at least some chapters in it. Although I did some other chapters where I talk about change, where the small group gets more into the picture. I also have been very interested, of course, in family business. I wrote 2 books on family business, which of course is a fascinating area for clinicians, because such craziness takes place there, when people regress to be 5 years old and still act it out among each other.
Does that interest in family business have anything to do with your father?
Sure, sure. I saw finally after he left how the family business got destroyed. Vendettas between different family members, and so really Greek tragedies take place in the family business, and sometimes they're very difficult to change. To change patterns is very, very. I was the comments is there's always hope, there's death. So that's it's true. It's terrible. Letting go. It's not easy, because I let go of my directorship, and I've been very gracious about it. I think because I've been preaching that you shouldn't pick your own successor alone. You should give advice, but not alone. And also I think you should give the person space, not hang over there and hope to become a messiah to save the whole mess, whatever. It is going to be a mess. And I think I've been very gracious about that. I let it go, and there's also some benefits. I have more time to think, which was not so easy for the last years with all the things going
on. Several of your colleagues, in talking about you as a scholar and a person, use various terms that I would translate as flexible. One of them said you live by the theme, do what makes sense or do what works. Someone else said, do what works. Elizabeth Florin said you had the Woody Allen philosophy of whatever works. And I could go on, but they all sort of had different takes on that.
They listen to me carefully, because I always tell them I do whatever what works. I don't say this is the only way to do it. If I see, like motivational interviewing, it's actually a little bit counter to the psychodynamic tradition. But you have a famous person in coaching, Marshall Goldsmith, and he said there is no past, which is bullshit. But on the other hand, he looks at the future, which makes a lot of sense. What can you do to go for the future? But you cannot avoid to be influenced by the past. So that part of him I have a hard time understanding. It's and I don't think I think he might have a temporary victory, but it will come back. I've seen it too often. So you have to. That was on like Russia, which has been closed. I brought Russia actually to INSEAD, because I was being fascinated by Russian literature. That was my was kind of the hook. And Putin hasn't dealt with the past. It's basically because, of course, being a KGB, there's too many negative connotations, and so there's a danger of certain things repeating itself. Then, there was a book written many years ago by a psychoanalyst in Germany. It was quite influential, The Inability to Mourn by Mitscherlich. I think Germany has done quite some mourning about their past and the atrocities. They made an effort. Austria didn't. They basically said it was the Germans. Hitler was Austrian, by the way, as you might know.
Yes, you do.
And so they pretend under this kind of Gemütlichkeit and operette atmosphere, but they have not really dealt with their Nazi past.
So you several times have raised the name of Nelson Mandela. Do you think that one of his successes is the fact that he helped the country come to terms with its past?
Yes. The Truth Committee with Bishop Tutu was, I think, very important for the country. And to some extent, when you think about other countries where atrocities have been played, like Argentina, also, it's important. And now, of course, that's going to be a problem in the Middle East. How are they going to deal with all those issues? So, Tunisia has actually done remarkably well with the first election, which is a positive role model. We'll see. Now, of course, Tunisia is not as big. It has somewhat of a French tradition, for better or for worse. Egypt is a very big country. Other story, and when you go to Libya, a very different tradition, tribal tradition,
right,
which has been too fast urbanized. And I mean, I don't want to talk about Syria, what's going on there, which is dismal. And of course, Saudi Arabia has its own problems, which is kind of strange marriage of family business and the Wahhabi religion. I mean, it will not hold.
The family business being
yeah.
monarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the Consulting and Coaching for Change program. I talked to Roger Lehman and Eric Vandeloo both about the genesis of that program, but I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how that program got started.
Actually, you probably have different. There will going to be different interpretations of history. According to my interpretation of history, is that there was a meeting here at the Connaught Hotel many years ago, and Roger and Eric were two youngsters, relative.
Gerhard Lenz, maybe.
Gerhard Lenz, Gerhard Lenz, who was a fairly wealthy person, thanks to his wife, who was a Henkel, and
yes.
Henkel is a big company. So Gerhard, so what I decided was to have those two put a number of psychoanalysts together with a group of HR directors and see what happens. So they run a relatively unsuccessful seminar. I think the HR people were more willing to compromise than the psychoanalysts, with some exceptions. So they were rather frustrated with it. And there was an opening at INSEAD. Also, I was running this CEO seminar, and coaching became...
So basically, the psychoanalysts were not very good subjects.
Were not very good, very adaptive. At the same time, I had quite a few clients who came to me of the strategic consulting firms. They wanted their younger consultants to be better with their clients. I mean, Bain was one of them, and PCG was one of them. Of course, I did a lot of work later with McKinsey. And so we designed a seminar originally aimed at consultants. We discovered that the people who applied was a tripartite population. 1/3 consultants from the large consulting firms to the small ones, mom and pop stores, people in talent management, human development, HR in general, and line managers. And the original model was a modular system, which was a little bit like Henry Mintzberg had also was a kind of some kind of program through many different universities. Gosling, who's now is one of the people of the who's now the chairman of the meeting here.
Yes, yeah.
Is so the input came a little bit from the failed experience of this called Epoch. Was called the failed experience of Roger and Eric. My experience with doing workshops for consulting firms privately, and my CEO seminar. That was the input. And I still remember the two of them. They were so scared. It was the first time they had to stand in front of a class. Really, class was a big deal for them. There was also, by the way, one other thing. It was a joint venture with HEC, And there's an artifact that HEC is owned by the Chamber of Commerce of Paris.
Okay, and then what? I'm going to have to ask you for the term again.
HEC it's the Grande École. France has this system of grade schools, which are the great specialized schools, which are the actionists, like the universities. But if you graduate from a Grande École, you get a job for sure. If you graduate university, it's not so sure. You have to pass this competitive entrance exam.
Right.
So HEC is the best business school in France.
Okay.
And it's owned by the Chamber of Commerce. And the Chamber of Commerce owns the ground INSEAD in France is standing on, in Fontainebleau. That's not a good thing, because they never expected INSEAD to outshine HEC. So they've been pestering us to some extent. So they wanted collaboration with INSEAD. So when the two deans saw a possibility of a program together, it was a match made in heaven for 2 years, because then I de-hired HEC, which was not a love affair, but I think they took it graciously. Mm-hmm. Which had to do partially with the hotel facilities, which HEC is now better, I think, but they had a monopoly hotel. They also had very good hotel facilities. So that's the way it started. And I had the support also of at the time, the assistant dean, who became later one of my students and worked for me, of executive education. So it was all a combination of factors. And it was a raving success.
And persists?
I mean, now I got my degree because when I de-hired HEC, I lost the degree, and after 8 years of pesting and whatever, and also basically, as I said, because of the success of the program, and of course the stabilizer of the income stream, when you have long programs opposed to short programs. So we have now 2 sections, one in Singapore and one here. In Singapore I was worried about because the first priority in developing countries is not this kind of orientation, but fantastic students, full house.
Another major leadership program.
That's what we very much also do due to Eric and Roger, because they have been, because they have to manage the lives of those 36 people in class.
Right. And they're involved with both.
Yeah, they do both. That is, by the way, there's one concern I have. Think about it, you have 16 sessions and all those lives and jet lagging back and forth, it's exhausting. And because I basically decided now only to be there at the opening session.
No, and I actually caught up with Roger. He was in Chicago.
But Roger has become a really...
he promised to sit still for an hour, and he was very gracious, and he did. So.
He's become crazy in a way. He's becoming, he's caught up in the INSEAD syndrome, and my worry sometimes, when you talk about reflective space for your students, how much reflective space can you have? I mean, living basically, he's American. Then he has a house in Frankfurt, officially lives in Singapore, Texas, I guess. So, I mean, and then all the other things. I mean, it's, we say, okay, you can make a lot of money, but how money do you need? How much?
You also at the INSEAD worked with another major leadership program called the Challenge of Leadership.
That's my CEO recycling.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
That's been a laboratory for all the programs, really, of testing things out. If I'm being very honest, but Eric and Roger may have a different opinion now, and now it's more I've been destroying. But the basis of that program comes from COLE, the Challenge of Leadership. I mean, and the questions, the kind of approach, and all those things comes very much from there. From the Challenge of Leadership, the CEO program.
Yeah.
Because, but then of course the difference is that it's a modular program that. We bring in, for example, a professor of psychiatry from Canada, from Toronto, for the interpersonal segment. We bring in different people. We bring in Randy Carlock, who is interested. I wrote a book with him together on family business, the family business section. You get different specialists. So it's colored by, but it's still also very much the live presentation.
Mm-hmm. And that particular program is for executives.
Yeah, you have to, the age range is also worrisome to me at the time. It was between 30 and 65. Works. Some of the grandchildren, some of the grandfathers.
You're also the founder of INSEAD Global Leadership Center, 2002. Yes. What prompted you to found that center?
A kick from the dean.
Kick from the dean. There must have been more than a kick from the dean at that point. You were pretty senior.
It was, yeah, it's true. I mean, the dean gets too big a kick, he basically down to F himself. You know, that's very true about my rebelliousness towards authority. No, it was, we had a faculty retreat, and the Boston Consulting Group wrote a report about the INSEAD study, and one complaint was that we didn't have much of a leadership focus, while we're saying we create leaders for the world. So then at that meeting, probably a public execution meeting, the dean asked me in public with all the others if I would be willing to take the lead. And I said yes. And so I had no choice because I was the only one at the school.
So what did you see as the mission of the Global Leadership Center? What was it to do?
To create sustainable, more humane organizations. So creating leaders who act according to that.
So it's primarily an academic program?
Not at all.
No,
I mean, I told about our business model. In the first place, when you look at our MBAs, the average age is 29, 30, so they already had quite some experience. We have a doctoral program, that's fair, that's true. But then 60% of our revenue comes from the business community.
Okay.
So no relevance, no repeat. Very simple. We have now more chairs, but our business model is very fragile. So we have to relate to the business community, which worries me sometimes because of the academic respectability. And I think there are very often two solitudes if you're not careful. So we actually have now a caste system. We have the tenure track professors, and you have the slaves. Those are the affiliate professors. They do a lot of teaching, and the adjunct professors.
The tenure track and the slaves. That's.
I mean, nasty about it.
And the tenure track have the obligation to publish, the
referee journals. Yeah.
And those who do not, they work with the business community.
They teach a lot. So, but it's not good because we wanted to be. In the past, when I was the first time, you could get tenure if you were an excellent teacher. Now it's impossible to become a tenured professor, excellent teacher. You need so many papers in 8 journals.
So do you think that one of the things that the Global Leadership Center has done is to expose some problems with the academy in terms of the way it's organized and interfaces with the rest of the world?
You know, we are all those business world driven by ratings. You know, it's the Financial Times, it's the Economist, it's the Wall Street Journal, and that. You know, so how many publications and things like that. And I think it's sad because we have now at our school, we talk about the caste system. We have, of course, assistant, associate, full, chair, professor. That's the tenure track group. Then you have adjunct, that's the lowest slave. I can make adjunct professors. I made quite a few people. Adjunct, affiliate, senior affiliate, and professor management practice. It's ridiculous. I mean, we're all in the same boat, and it's not. And it is, you know. And some of those A journals, I've written some of the A journals. Nobody reads them. They totally trite.
It's true, isn't it?
I mean, ASQ, the most creative part is very often the cover. But for the rest, do I read articles in ASQ? Rarely. It must be a very special article. Boring. It basically shows your efficiency in manipulating data. So maybe there's something good about that, but what about being good in the design of programs, that kind of thing. But I think it's a little bit sad, but you can go to Duke where they have basically two organs. You have one of the nerds who write articles, but maybe you can outsource that now. And one of the people who really do the work with the executives. Right. But when you think in medical school, you hope that your research will better the patient. I wonder how much of the research is bettering our clients. I do wonder. That worries me. It's a real concern to me. I'm not the only one. I mean, I know Warren Bennis wrote about it. Jeff Sonnenfeld wrote about that. Other people, Henry Mintzberg wrote about it. I wrote about it. It's been worrisome, but who's listening? Nobody's listening. Keep on going, driven by the ratings. So you can make a Jeremiah and say, but I think it's sad. I mean, you have to become a full professor with the 3 criteria. One is institutional contribution. You have to be a dean or so, or director of a center. Fine. Then is the academic writing, and then teaching, including teaching methodology. Now, if you are excellent in I think in 2 of them, but you have to be now in our school. You have to be good. You have to write papers for 8 journals. Otherwise, you become an affiliate professor or a senior affiliate professor. And some of those senior affiliate professors should be normal professors, not a second-class citizen. And I've told that many times, but we have, in that respect, have lost a little bit our soul, I feel. Because do we want to be? I was in McGill. 80% of my colleagues couldn't talk to an executive, which is ridiculous. They could. It's ridiculous. It becomes, two solitudes. And now, don't get me there.
No.
You got me there, but I'm trying to get away from there.
Now I'll pull back. In the spring of 2011, you stepped down as director of the Global Leadership Center, and you mentioned that already, and that you felt it was time to do that. Do you think that planning for succession is an important part of being a leader? And is that what you were doing?
No, I mean, the real acid test of a leader is how well a successor does. Mm-hmm. It's very simple, and very few pass that test. Mm-hmm. So I want my successor to succeed. He is not a clinician. He's going to take my course.
Oh,
which I think because we have a brand. My coaches have this brand, the clinical brand. So I suggest that he takes my CEO course, and he graciously accepted that because he lives in Singapore, so he has to fly 3 times because the 4th module is in Singapore. So he's doing that,
good.
Which is a good sign, I felt.
He's
a very different kettle of fish than I am. He's much more. He comes from the Harvard edition of control. Mm-hmm. Control faculty, so he's much more hands-on than me. So that's a little bit of a shock for some of the people. Suddenly go from one extreme to the other extreme. See how it works.
I bet it was shocking for the people who worked there. Yeah. During the time you were at INSEAD, from 1982 through 2011, when you stepped down as director of the Global Leadership Center.
I'm still a professor at INSEAD.
I know you are. I'm still going to get you to reflect a little bit, though. How would you assess, in that time period, which is quite a lengthy period of time, how would you assess INSEAD's significance as a center for theoretical and applied study of leadership?
So-so, because there's been too much of a one-man show, and it's me, and which is unfortunate. It's getting better now a little bit, but it has been, and because most of the people I could attract, were practitioners. That's the reason I forced them to start to. Blaming them for, Dean repeated my words, the one-trick pony. We are a very good one-trick pony, and I wanted some differentiation. Now it's slowly happening. I think the OB department is also rising more to the occasion. I think organization behavior department, but it was too much. I don't know what, for example, in USC, University of Southern California, have this leadership center. I think there are more different people there. It's bigger. But not easy to get, it's not that easy to get people either. You're sitting in the forest of Fontainebleau, and in that respect, it's a risky business for young scholars to go there. It's easier now, we give them a lot of, they don't get paid too badly, we give them a lot of free time and whatever. It's not a very heavy teaching load, which they get. We have been doing really package them in, and not a Darwinian survivor like I had to do at the time. But no, it's, in that respect, I've developed lots of people, but I had to. I was trying to preach partially the pragmatics of leadership. That's what I did, meaning that I did it. It's not just theorizing about it. I did it, but I have had a hard time to get many of those people to sit down and making interesting contributions. I would, for example, on the whole issue between leadership and corporate culture, I would have seen more of that, but they're very good with small group work, and even there I would have liked to have more writing done. Eric, for example, had this capability, but again, he's too busy running around. Mm-hmm. Eric is much more of a scholar. Mm-hmm. Roger cannot write; he's not a writer. Liz is now reflecting on group dynamics, is writing on that, and she has written quite a few books with me, and so she is getting more on her own. So there are some, and people have the illusion it's a whole big center. It's not a big center. It is a virtual center. And I probably could have built more alliances also in hindsight. I have a lot of people want to work with me, but I don't really. When I'm there. But I also, I have lots of other constituencies. So I'm looking all the time for people who can bridge. That's what I'm looking for. There are not that many who can do that. Because a lot of, I mean, you look here, there are 801 persons who come to the UK to listen to leadership speeches or whatever, and all different on the most esoteric topics. So there must be a whole industry is going on there.
So do you think that's a good thing, or?
I don't know. I mean, I'm a pragmatic person.
Mm-hmm.
So I say, how does it help the patient, quote unquote?
Mm-hmm.
And I think much of it doesn't help the patient very much. And of course, then you have also the area of consulting firm. I have my own consulting firm, which is very narcissistically called by my colleagues the KDVI, which stands for using my leadership brand. So a lot of consulting. I mean, I was at the conference at Harvard last year. It was last year. I mean, time flies. And Nitin was not yet the dean of the Harvard Business School, and he had organized it with Rakesh. And yet, I think 40 presentations in 2 days, and many of them were like hallelujah men and women. Hallelujah, you do this and your world will change. It got me very itchy about all this hallelujah thing. A lot of consulting firms have this particular model, and in this model, so things. And I listened to some of. I had dinner with 2 leadership scholars at Cambridge, Ron Heifetz and Bob Keegan. And so it's and then you listen to people talking about them. I'm getting a little bit itchy. They're human beings with their weaknesses and frailties, but it becomes all deification taking place. So there's an expression in my language: "Doe maar gewoon, dan ben je al gek genoeg." That means be normal, then you're already crazy enough. So that's something truth about it.
Well, I'm trying to think here a little bit about the scholarship of leadership, and without trying to frame a question so that it presupposes an answer, what happens to the significance of that body of scholarship when the scholars retreat into rooms and talk to each other?
I think it becomes a masturbatory exercise, to be very honest, because I think many of the leadership studies are done in laboratories or with young students who have not much experience, and so it is very healthy for many of the leadership scholars to meet politicians, to meet senior civil servants. I mean, I deliberately went to the senior group because I want to have oomph, to use that word again. I want impact. I mean, many of the studies have been done, of course, original study also in organizational behavior, to lower the factory floor and things like that. I went deliberately there to really have an impact because of my fantasy about the cascade effect. And I think it's a very healthy idea for leadership scholars to say, okay, what do I have to tell? If I would have 20, 30, 100 executives, what can I tell them that will add some value to them? They walk away and say, this was interesting. I can learn something and can use it in my work. That should be somewhere in the back of their mind.
So you think that
and that is very often, it's very often like in HR. Sometimes you get staff and staff and staff and staff. They start to live a separate life from the organization. I've seen that too many times, and they finally implode. They wonder, I have more questionnaires, and what are they doing there? They go to conferences, scary. So you have to remember, what business are you in? I'm quite pragmatic about that because I had to make money. I was the only center at INSEAD who made money. I still am the only one who make money. So I'm very pragmatic about it. I mean, can you add value? Can you tell something new? Can you make your organizations better? Can you help people function better? That kind of thing.
And you think that is a test of the value of? Yeah,
I mean, you can, of course, you can do. Lewin said about the best theory is the most. I was again the sentence of him. The theory is the most pragmatic thing. Whatever, I forgot it. With some question marks. I mean, to me, I come from a family of entrepreneurs, and my father used to make fun of me sometimes about all this the dismal science, economics. What use is that? So that's still very much alive. If am I doing something which is helpful to the client? Which in that respect, the medical metaphor is very relevant to me. Doing something which is relevant to the client.
So you stepped down as a director of the Global Leadership Center this past spring, You're still a full professor at INSEAD. You're still working hard. Do you consider yourself to be a work in progress?
Yes, I'm a work in progress, but I'm wondering now because in America you can stay as a professor till you're totally gaga. I think that's because it is, but not in Europe. So I was the first professor at INSEAD who got a postponement because at that time the retirement age was 65. They can even afford the retirement age 65 in France. Right. So now it's 70, and so I mean I'm going to become 70 next year. So I'm trying to think, what will I do? I don't like the title Emeritus. I find that I have a difficult time with that. Emeritus sounds like you are. Of course, I'm stupid not to be Emeritus because it's probably better for me to be financially. It's better to be Emeritus. Mm-hmm. So I've been thinking about that. On the other hand, I have been offered on a regular basis now professorships in other places. But I do like. I mean, France is a nice museum. It's good. It's a nice museum. There's something. I mean, when I was working in Singapore.
What makes France a museum?
I mean, I was working in Singapore and there's this shop till you drop atmosphere. And after a while I got a claustrophobia. Buy. Then I come back to Paris. I walk 30 seconds. I'm at the quay. See there the Notre Dame. See there all the bridges. I said, this is really pretty. It's aesthetically very pretty. Yeah. And so it's a museum because they're changing. And it was certainly a museum under Mitterrand and Chirac. I think Sarkozy tries to do certain things, but there are a lot of For example, try to get a taxi at 6 o'clock in the evening in Paris. Good luck. They have the same number of taxis as 1930. It's a monopoly.
I tried at 6 o'clock in the morning.
That's totally hopeless. That's totally hopeless because they don't work.
Yeah.
Because it's not a good time. You only can work 11 hours or so. So you don't start. You start at 11 o'clock in the morning, but not at 6 o'clock. So so you find ways around it. I have now an abonnement and a subscription for my taxi, so I get a taxi. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it was a hard lesson because it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Now, things like that. What I'm trying to say is that the organizational processes they march on, and to really do something about it takes time. Mm-hmm. And I think in that respect, Sarkozy has been trying. It's part of his theatrics. Mm-hmm. He has been trying.
I know that you're still full professor and that you're still working, but I'm still going to ask you this question anyhow. You've been in this business
too long,
decades. What do you consider to be your legacy? What are the most important things you've done? We'll take away the word legacy. What are you proudest of? What do you think are the most important things you've done?
I'm trying to recall the metaphor of putting your finger in a glass of water and taking it out. What is left? So in the march of time, you should be very modest. I mean, I've seen. I've been so many years in the management business, and look at people who are very famous, and now it's very temporary high. I think very often, and very few people have a lasting impact. Which is so. I mean, I have made some narcissistic dreams, but I'm also a realist.
Okay, I'll ask it a different way. I think I pushed the wrong button. What are you proudest of? What do you feel the best about?
I think my children. That's a
good start.
That's a good start. I mean, the children. I'm rather pleased with the children. They're doing well. I'm also proud of some of my ex-students. I see them flourish. Which, like for example, in Berlin, there are a number of my students there, and they do very well. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. And I saw them. I saw one of them in Cambridge. And you see him there, very active. It's nice to see. So that's that. Look at Roger and Eric, who are in a way my students. They do quite well. So that's, and then I think I made an effort to be one of the people to bring the human being back into the organization. To say, because that was when I was at the Harvard Business School. And in the MBA program, there was very little of that, I can tell you that. It was all structure. Not as bad, by the way. I think it's not enough. Mm-hmm. And so I have made my mini effort to bring it a little bit back there, make people aware of those things. I mean, so think about behavioral economics, which is now so popular. maybe because of this kind of more clinical lens, that has an indirect influence to the culture of organizations. And I guess they elected me at one point in time a fellow of the academy, which I'm a deviant. I mean, in a way. I mean, I don't feel necessarily that comfortable. I was there at the last meeting, not the last meeting, the previous one. I never go there. Too many people. Montreal, and so there were some new members were being inaugurated, and so many citations. I felt really out of it, I must say, listening to that. I was lucky I was sitting beside some interesting people for a change, but it could have been bad luck about, of course everybody has his hobby and whatever his focus, but I felt not completely with it. Maybe that's the story of my life. An outsider, it was like the Camus, the outsider, looking always at the distance, what's going on there.
Do you think that's one of the things that pushed you to keep working and trying new things and crossing boundaries?
I mean, I'm a pest.
A pest?
I'm a pest, yeah. I can be a pest. I mean, pest I try to be constructive pest, but I'm a pest, asking sometimes questions which, and basically, now you go to a cocktail party or whatever, you go to a dinner, now you can talk about the weather, you can talk about politics, and you can ask some very incisive questions, and you get actually much more out of it. So in the beginning it can be shocking, but in the end they realize you get more out of that than say another boring evening and boring dinner.
Is there anything that you, as you think about your career, that you wish you could have a do-over, that you'd do differently if you had a chance?
No, I mean, I was walking with my wife in Cambridge, and we were reflecting what kind of life you would have led if I would have been professor there. And that time I felt that Harvard was the center of the world, this kind of illusion. And it's difficult, our children probably live in America then, would have lived in America. They would not live in Sweden and in here and France. And you can speculate about that. And so it was a narcissistic injury that I didn't get a professorship for the wrong reasons, because of, so that is something, but the question how you deal with it, and easy to deal with success, it's much better to, and so I think I have an interesting life. Could I be able to function according to the rules of the Harvard Business School, which is, very, driven by teaching groups and things like that? Maybe not. This kind of regime. I was having breakfast with a young professor, who actually is a professor at INSEAD. He's there now teaching for a year, and I was listening to him and said, "Is that really for me? This kind of lockstep, all the things you have to do, teaching groups and so many meetings and teaching group. I'm too rebellious for that." So, but on the other hand, it's interesting to speculate. By that time, it was a great desire of mine, which had to do with idealization of, I come from a non-academic milieu, and at those time, the first time I came to the Harvard Business School, professors were, demigods. Now I realize you all have clay feet. But it was funny. Last year I met who became the associate dean at Harvard Business School. He's retired, of course, and he was my first teacher in business policy, and he was scary. He was scary.
What was his name?
Hugo Uiterhoeven, you don't know him. He was Dutchman. But I remember my English was not very good. The case message, in the Dutch tradition, you just sit there somewhere in the back and nothing happens. But he called on people, cold calls. Scary. So I actually went to him. He was nice to me. I said, "Listen, my English is not so good." So I was trying to explain to him indirectly that maybe he shouldn't call on me because I would really make a fool of myself. So then I met him in a different situation. I'm now a very well-known professor, and he is, and so you see all the, what's the big deal? What was all, and he's the one now who's trying to go the other way around and try to see more of me. It's so, but I had never been also at the time talk about the network. I'm never a terrible networker. Because I'm too much of a dreamer, and too much a loner in certain ways. That's coming back also to the Leadership Center at INSEAD. the shoot. I think it became successful, the second largest in the world, because I had to deal against things. I didn't get the support of the dean. I didn't get the support of the organizational behavior group because they were anxious about, and so I would, in spite of, I made it a success. So maybe I need that. I need that as part of my personality. But I didn't do a Selesnik, I think, because there is no legacy. Because I was at this conference of leadership, and people hadn't heard of him anymore. He was at the time was quite important, but he hadn't developed enough people. I mean, he didn't do that. He was, I think, too, and that I have not done. So I see now this. A big pillar is going to be this. I wanted INSEAD to become the best school in soft skills in the world, and I think we're getting there. We might already be it. That was my dream, because every dean talks about the soft skills, the harder skills, etc. But what are they doing about it? We are doing something about it. We have now an executive master's in it. It's a serious business, and 2 continents. So it's also it permeated through all the programs also. So that's a legacy.
So you said the best school of soft skills.
The best business school in the world in soft skills.
Okay, and for the benefit of somebody who doesn't quite know what that means, what are soft skills?
Interpersonal, emotional intelligence, that kind of thing. Interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence, and I think it will be hard to find a school which is better in it at the moment. We're a big school, we have 1,000 MBA students, which is and then 3,000-4,000 executives. So
but that's your mark on that.
What?
That's your mark.
And I think that's my. To some extent, you can say that I made a contribution. And my people who did it. I'm not in the mass production, but I think it was my influence that added to it.
Okay. I want to ask you one more question.
That's a very good question, actually, because that you pull that out, because that has been important to me. But I don't wave the flag too much, and I forget about it. But this has been that what I've been telling the deans. Yes, that's my vision, and it took them some time. The new dean listens. He listens. He has a sense of what I have been doing. He was actually very gracious when I resigned as director. The whole event was around it. So that.
Is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't, or anything that you would have liked to have said that I didn't give you a chance to say?
They're two different things.
Yes, they're two questions. And
questions.
Actually, the ACME Oral History Manual says don't do that, so I'll ask you one at a time. Is there anything that you wanted to say that I didn't give you a chance to say?
I always say to people, you have told me, I've asked you many questions, anything you want to ask me, that's why I solved this, which is a nice question, actually, and that people feel that's not just a one-way street. Now, you have done a very good job. I feel that you, of course, there are always things, odds and ends, which are not touched upon, which has to do also with personal life and things like that. But you got some images of my personal life and why I did certain things in the relationship between personality and a life in general. Why for a detective, it's not so difficult to figure out certain relationships, and that's what I would say. I'm playing Sherlock Holmes. That's one of the things one has to do. What's the time? We have really, I guess, a cocktail party is coming.
Yeah, I think we probably need to call this off. So, while I still have the recorder on, I want to say thank you very much for being kind enough to sit with me on behalf of the International Leadership Association and the Tobias Center for Leadership Excellence, and I will now turn